The Existential Crisis Hotline. The Existential Crisis Hotline. The Existential Crisis Hotline. The Existential Crisis Hotline. The Existential Crisis Hotline.
Hey everybody, I'm back. We're back. Existential Crisis Hotline. If you're in the chat, let me know if everything sounds good, looks good. All my meters look good. Just got back from a little quick 1 week-ish hiatus. I think the last one was last Thursday. No, that can't be right. Went to the Bahamas with my family and with my friends in our self-perfected group. And that was a lot of fun. We went on a cruise. It was a lot of fun. We went to Key West and Bimini, Bahamas. And it was really, really, really cool. We just got back yesterday. We drove. You know, you could fly, but it just takes a little bit longer when you drive. And, you know, I like driving because you don't have to go through that, oh, what if I forget to pack something? You can just put it all in your, we have a Suburban, just put it all in there. Take everything extra, you know, figure it out. But, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And now I'm back, ready to roll. And, man, I have got some really, really cool stuff for tonight. Just thinking about where to begin. Well, it's the Existential Crisis Hotline, which means, you know, there's a lot of people today, especially in 2026, who are going through a lot of inner questioning, outer questioning, you know, what's going on in this world? What's happening? You know, I think for a lot of people, probably 2020 was a big wake up for a lot of people. And probably people have woken up before that and had wake up calls. You know, I think the first time I really started questioning things was probably about 2005, I would say, really started questioning things. And that led me to where I'm at now. And, the purpose of this stream is to support people who are looking for what is our purpose here on this earth as human beings. What are we here for? Why are we here? What are we here for? What is the point of all this? And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that say, well, I have the answer. I know what it is. So you don't have to believe me. I'm not asking you to believe me. It's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to... you know, just listen, ask questions. There's no way I can convince you in one stream of everything that I've realized, but I can point the way, and I can sort of point out things to open up ideas, open up concepts, considerations. But anybody who's really serious and kind of feels like, you know, the things I'm saying make a lot of sense, you're always welcome to message me, send me a personal message in the chat. I don't know if you can direct message me in here, but I'm on X at the Cameron Cope, and I'm on Instagram at Real Cameron Cope. I'm also on Facebook under my name, Cameron Cope. I do everything in my name. So if there's anybody out there claiming to be me and they don't have my name and it's not my accounts, it's not me. I don't have anonymous accounts. I do everything in my name. So in any case, welcome. Hey, Sandro. I see you in the chat. I'm back. We're back. And, man, like I was saying in the beginning, I don't know when you jumped on, but I've got some really cool stuff. Where to begin? Man, I'm really sweaty. It's kind of a little bit hot in here. If I turn on the AC, it's just going to be a lot of background noise. I don't know. It's actually on, so we'll see if it's not running right now, but if it gets noisy and you can hear it too much, just let me know. I'll turn it off. But I had to run out and do the hay for the animals quickly before I started. Because now that we're back, it's spring. So we've got the cows and the horses out on pasture. So we're rotating them through. And then I just had to throw some hay out there for them, some alfalfa, because they need a little bit extra. But yeah, now they're eating grass and they love that. So that's pretty cool. Otherwise, I think I'll just kind of jump into it. If anybody else is there in the chat, say hi. Let me know you're there. And if you're in the chat and you see other people aren't, let them know we're doing the stream. I posted on Facebook. I forgot to make a reel. But I did make a little post on my Facebook, although that doesn't get a lot of reach. So I got to remember to do the reels because I think that really gets a lot more reach when I do a little reel and talk about the stream. But if you know people who you think might enjoy this, let them know. I do it every Monday through Saturday, 8:30 p.m. here at the same place. And then I upload these later on YouTube. I'm probably like a week or so behind on uploading them, so this one probably won't go up for a week because I pretty much can only do one a day. They take a long time to upload, and we got a lot of stuff that we do here at the ranch and just other responsibilities that I have. So man, where do I begin? Few streams back we were talking about we went into a whole discussion of mental illness, schizophrenia, OCD, stuff like that. Hey, OAE 2026, whoever you are, nice to see you here. But we went into a whole discussion about OCD, schizophrenia, and then kind of led into religious experiences, white light experiences, spiritual awakenings. Can you guys hear the air conditioning? Is it annoying? If it gets annoying, let me know. It just kicked on, so I can hear it, but I don't know if you can. So if it's not a problem, that's great because it's a little hot in here. But we went into all those, people who were considered paranoid schizophrenics and some of the stuff that they said in those states. And that's kind of been a little bit of a theme that I've been developing here through the stream. And then I think we talked about CIA mind control. We talked about ODD. Not ODD. DID, dissociative identity disorder, and people who experienced that and like kind of where that comes from. And I don't remember how far we went in the context of well, I'll just say this, and then if I haven't covered it, maybe we'll do another stream on it. But, when you look at the DID stuff, the dissociative identity disorder, these people have this trauma when they're young. And then in that trauma, their identity sort of takes a back seat. And then they develop these other personalities that take time to manifest. They're not saying personality is the wrong word. It's really new identities that will come forward in moments where who they believe they are, their identity kind of goes in the background. This other identity steps forward, has different memories, totally different personality, dresses differently, says different things. And it's like, this is what we call multiple personality disorder, although it's called DID now. So we were talking about that. And then I was doing a little research because, like I said, we drove to Florida where we went on the cruise ship. And so I had like 16 hours of driving with the family, obviously, but I was listening to some things while I was driving. And I started just kind of going down that rabbit hole a little bit. And I found this guy named Max Spears, who I guess I had heard his name before, but I never really listened to anything he said. And I have to be honest, he sounds a little bit wacko. I can understand people listen to that, they're like, just dismiss it, it's wacko, right? Just like a lot of the stuff we talked about on previous streams where these people say crazy stuff. But when you really look into it, it's like some of it actually makes sense, right? And even that point of, it's easy to dismiss someone as crazy, but then how many people in our world follow religions where, from an objective point of view, they're literally, the person who founded the religion is literally just schizophrenic, like hearing voices and talking to God. And I mean, they can't all be doing that, right? If they're saying contradictory things, right? So now I don't hold the view that they're literally just schizophrenic. I know there's more to it than that. But I can understand how with limited context, somebody would think, oh, they're literally just crazy, right? But that doesn't mean just because they're crazy, or sorry, it doesn't mean that just because I don't think they're just crazy that what they're saying is necessarily valid. But it is an interesting perspective sometimes. And I'll get more into, I think by the end of this stream, it'll be pretty clear where I stand on that and what I see. Well, maybe it won't be totally clear, but it'll be moving in that direction. Hey, Gaitan. I see you in the chat. So where was I? So we've got DID, which is like, oh, okay. So then I did a little bit more research. We had kind of randomly watched this interview on Software Underbelly from this woman who was saying she was part of CIA mind control programs, MK Ultra, and we were looking into some of the different MK programs, like MK Naomi and other ones. And I was just making the point of like, it might be easy to dismiss this woman like, she's making stuff up, she's nuts, whatever, that didn't really happen to her. But when you look into the CIA mind control stuff, you're like, well, but they actually did do these programs on people, so there's got to be some people out there that they actually experienced it. So that brings me to the Max Spears stuff, and maybe I'll just pull something up. Give me 1 second, I'll pull it up, and then I'll switch the screen over. Because I wasn't actually planning on talking about Max Spears, but it's kind of cool context. What is this? Random program popping up. Okay, let me move it over here. Screen share. There we go. Death of Max Spears. Max Spears. Why can't I click on his name? That's weird. That's weird. That is really weird, actually. That is really, really, really weird. Weird meaning you can't just look up who the guy is. Look, I'm trying to click it. The only thing that pops up is when I type in his name is Death of Max Spears, and then it's literally just about his death. And kind of framing it as, he was just dying from an overdose. Some people think he was killed to shut him up about something, because he was actually on his way to a conference, called his mom, said, I think I'm going to be killed, and then he was killed. Or, well, he died. It was never proven that he was killed, I guess. But it's really weird that you can't just click on his name. There's no Wikipedia article on just him. Maybe there is. Let's see. Look at that. That is really weird. I mean, it's not weird, actually, but it should seem weird. Like, why can't you just look him up? That is so strange. Well, again, it's not actually strange. Look, it's all just about the strange death. What happened to him? I don't remember exactly how I came across him. I think it was just a random... No, that's not true. I know how I came across him. Because there was a video I was looking for when we were doing a stream previously, and I was looking for this specific video, and I knew I couldn't really find it quickly, so I was just like, I can't find it. I'll look for it later. So before we started driving, I wanted to watch this really specific video. I remember seeing, I don't even know, like maybe 10 years ago or more, actually, probably like maybe 15 years ago. I saw this video on, and I'm pretty sure it was from this project called the Basis Project. And it mentions it in here. Where'd it go? That Amazon link. Max Spears, a selection of Basis presentations. There's this group called Basis Project. Let's see if this is it. The Basis Project. Whoa. Well, let me see it. Wow. Basis TV. Here we go. Yeah, this is it. Basis TV. Well, this is their TV thing. Let's see. Let's just find their actual website. Oh, this is the website. Well, it doesn't really tell you much about it, though, huh? forums. Let's see. Miles Johnston is a founder of an independent research project called the Basis Project, created in 1994. After interviewing a security guard called Barry King, who was part of various programs being conducted at the British underground military base between the village of Peasmore and the RAF nuclear base RAF Welford. He became an investigative journalist in 1994 after going in depth and deeper in his research on witness statements who had experienced similar incidents as described in other witness statements from UAP UFO phenomena reports. So he wanted to go further. And basically, what I understand about it, although I haven't really studied much about the project itself, I've just seen some of their stuff over the years. But there's like all these underground bases. So that was the starting point of their whole thing, was to like try to figure out what's going on at these bases, because they would interview people who would talk about being part of programs, etc., and going into all kinds of different esoteric subjects and so forth. And I remember looking into some of these different interviews in the past, like I said, 15 years ago, whatever. And there was this one video, I was really looking for it, because we were on that topic of schizophrenia and people having weird experiences and describing their experiences. And there was this one interview they did where it was this guy describing... See, I don't even remember the details of it. That's why I was trying to look for it. But it was him describing this, like, encounter with extraterrestrials, and it somehow had something to do with like 9/11 or something. It was so crazy, it was so out there that I was trying to find it. Anyway, so I was looking for that, and I found their YouTube, and I was going through it, couldn't find the one I was looking for, but then I saw one called Max Spear's Super Soldier, and I was like, well, that sounds insane. So I started watching that. And when you guys hear the word super soldier, okay, you can put in the chat if you want, what do you think of when you hear that word? Like, when you imagine, you've probably heard this term before. I've heard it before. It's out there in the world, like in movies and things. Or the idea that the government's creating super soldiers. Like, what do you guys think that means? Or what does that mean to you when you hear that, right? I always just thought of it as like some really buff, like super, super fit, like hype, they run really fast, they have high endurance, like they know all the martial arts, can use any weapon. That was like kind of my idea, which probably is kind of like what you would see in a movie or something, right? And so I started watching the interview, because the guy didn't look like he was some super crazy, like, like Arnold Schwarzenegger type guy or something. But then what I realized by listening, I started to put it together, what he was talking about, because he was a little bit all over the place, which is why I could relate. But as I listened to him, I realized he's describing DID. He's describing dissociative identity disorder. And he explained back in his childhood these very dark things that happened to him. But the way he described it was like it was deliberately being done to him. Like, it wasn't just, there was an abusive person in his life. The way he described it through his memories and so forth was that it was like deliberately being done in order to create a DID like point within him, so the idea of the super soldier then is that you deliberately traumatize somebody, probably at a young age, I would assume. And then they have this thing called honeycombing. Okay, and I don't really want to get too much detail into how they do it, because it's very graphic. But let's say you can use certain forms of abuse, and it will like send up sort of like an electrical surge into the body, where it like has this shocking effect, not like a literal electricity you're sending through. It's like through that trauma experience. Think of like Kundalini, right? Where it's like a surge of energy, right? And very similar to like an actual just traumatic experience. Like, it shocks that person's consciousness back, or their identity back. And then it's like there's this space where you can insert new identities. Now, I don't know how they do that. But in other words, it's like you can purposefully create DID in somebody. And the reason why that would be a super soldier is because you would be able to use certain sounds, certain stimulus, certain triggers to activate a certain identity to step forward. And if it was done in a certain way, the normal person's identity, which they call the what do they call it? There's like a name that they call that, the normal standard identity that the person sees as themselves, the day-to-day person. They have a word for it. I just can't remember what it is right now. But it's like the forward-facing identity. It doesn't remember when the other one comes forward. And when you listen to some of those interviews we went through on previous streams, that's what a lot of these people said. Some of them were aware, like they feel like they're just being suppressed and they're kind of aware that this other identity is there. Some people, the identity comes forward and then the normal identity just loses that time. They're like, where was I? What was happening? Did something happen? Like they don't even remember. Like this guy was describing, there would be certain movies he'd watch where, because it had certain triggers in it, not to say that the movie itself was deliberately put there to trigger him, it just had certain things in it that also served as triggers for him, like coincidentally, let's say. Or maybe on purpose, I don't know. But these triggers would happen in a movie, and then the movie's over, and he'd be sitting there like talking to his friend, hey, we should watch that movie. And the guy's like, we just watched it. What are you talking about? And he'd be like, what? What are you talking about? We already watched it. It's like, we just watched the whole movie. But he was describing the point where it's like that trigger happened, and because of that, that other identity came forward, and the forward-facing identity had no memory of it actually happening, right? So imagine if you're like, the CIA or something like that, you could use this in a way where like the normal person, they're just like the normal identity of this particular individual is just like a normal person going about their day, going to work, whatever. But then the other identity, because let's say, I'm just talking hypothetically because I don't know how it actually works, but let's say you take this person to a secret base, you switch on the identity, and then you train this person somehow in some accelerated way, or maybe just through a period of process and time of repeated exposure, to drive a motorcycle, to do martial arts, shoot a weapon, whatever. And then later, when you trigger that identity, now that identity has all those skills that could be used, but then when it goes back and the normal person comes forward, they're not even aware that they can do that. Like if you tried to get them to drive a motorcycle, they'd be like falling over, they wouldn't know how to do it. But the other identity has that and can access those memories in the body. It's really crazy. So I was just listening to all that, and I'm like, dude, like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. That we know it's possible because we watched all those videos of all these people where they had that disorder randomly. I'm assuming randomly, like I'm assuming not every single person who has DID is literally a part of a CIA mind control program, any more than somebody who's schizophrenic necessarily has to be, it like was induced in them. It could just be, they had the propensity genetically, they smoked a bunch of weed when they were 21 and they went schizophrenic because it induced that psychosis, right? That happens to people. But my point is, I realized, oh man, since it's possible for it to happen randomly, if you're some, nefarious organization that has a use for that, you could study how to induce it artificially. And then it really clicked to me like, oh, that's what these programs are. That's what that's all about. They're just trying to find ways to break the mind. And some of the other stuff I learned is like, that's what a lot of the stuff they were doing, like the Nazi scientists were doing, was pushing human consciousness to its limits in many different ways, like remote viewing, psychic abilities, astral projection, but also how do you break a person to the point where you can then insert certain memories and things or skills and then create like a super soldier, almost like a Manchurian candidate type of thing. And it just makes so much sense, like why there would be assassins, for example, that would do it and then really deny, like they don't remember doing it. Like it wasn't that they just chose to do it because they were crazy. They were triggered to do it, and then afterwards they don't remember it. So they literally can't tell you how they were. So in other words, if some organization wanted to assassinate somebody, they could go and program a person and tell them all about how to do it and why to do it or whatever, but then that individual would not ever have access consciously to those memories. It's like it'd be impossible to get it out of them, perhaps. Okay, so you could see why that would be an advantage for like these intelligence agencies or whoever's doing it, right? So anyways, that kind of led me down that rabbit hole a little bit. And then I was watching some other videos in the basis projects, which led me to other things, and now my algorithm is being influenced by that, so it's popping up with other stuff. And then I came across this guy named Jason Jorjani, excuse me, who I'd never, I think I'd seen a picture of him before, like in a podcast, but I never listened to anything he said, never really studied anything he said or anything. And he really went down some rabbit holes that I had not, it's not that they hadn't ever gone down that way, it was just the way he put it all together. It made me realize something. It gave me an insight into where our it gave me an insight into what people are really looking for right now, and the fact that there are certain conversations being had right now that I was just not aware of. I'm aware of the content of the conversations. It's not that I was just not aware that these conversations were occurring. So it's really cool, because I think that there's people out there that are really trying to figure out what's going on, other than myself, other than like the groups I'm a part of. Like there's other people out there trying to figure it out, but there's something they're all missing. Okay, and I want to go into that a little bit tonight. What is it that they're missing? But before I do that, I want to build a lot of context, right? Like I normally do. So I think I'll start with a few clips. We're not gonna. My plan is not to play like a whole long interview or something. I just want to find a few clips, because these are like. I watched, I think, 3 to 4 hour interviews of this guy over the course of my trip, and maybe even a couple more. So there's a lot there. There's no way I could do it all in a stream. I could do it over multiple streams, but I think what I'd rather do is just take some clips, at least for tonight, and make some points and show you a few things rather than just watching one thing. I want to like connect a bunch of dots. And I think you'll find this very fascinating. Some things you might have considered before, some things you might not have considered before. But I'm going to start with this X Spaces. I have not listened to the whole thing, but this is after watching all these interviews. I came across this X Spaces, and I've listened to maybe 30 minutes or maybe 45, 50 minutes of it. But I'm going to play some clips from some other interviews and a few other things, and we'll just kind of go down some rabbit holes here. But the beginning where they start, like it's like 27 minutes in because they had some technical difficulties. But about 27 minutes, they actually get started. And so there's a group, it's called Doom Room. I never heard of them before, but they are hosting this space, and then they've got Jason Jorjani, this researcher, and he calls himself a philosopher. I ordered a few of his books just to kind of understand a little bit more about how he's putting things together, and man, like he's 100% a philosopher. Like when you hear him talk, he explains things very, I think in a way like a lot of people can understand, but when you read his books, they're dense. They are very they're well done, they're well cited. I mean, just the footnotes alone were worth it. And the bibliography in the back, I was going through it. I was showing my son, I'm like, look at the bibliography. We're like just scrolling, flipping through it. And it's like, you know how the bibliography is. It's like a work cited, right? You have like one line per work. And it was like 6-7 pages of all the works he's citing in this one book that he's written. I think he's written like 14 books. And so there's a lot of value in it from my perspective for what I'm doing, because I'm like, there's a lot of little rabbit holes you can go down. Okay, so sorry, I know I'm kind of like ranting a little bit. I'm just trying to set the scene here. But basically, I'll give you a quick overview. Then I'm going to play this one little clip just to show you where I want to take this tonight. There's so much that he talks about. Some of it that I think is... I know is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say wild goose chase. I want to say like, it's like a dog is on a scent, but the scent is not, you're not going the right way. You're going down a false trail, basically. So some of the stuff he talks about are false trails, and I don't think he realizes it, but there's a lot of cool things that he connects. Okay, so I'm getting to the point, but let me give you a little bit more context. Essentially, what I'm understanding about the way he's looking at things is, and this is what's really relevant to what we're doing, is I've been studying this stuff since, like I said, 2005, really rigorously, like taking it very seriously as like my purpose. Um, and around 2008 is when I came across Destiny and started studying that. And when I started studying Destiny, I was like, okay, this is it. No more searching, right? Now, I still do a lot of research, but I'm not looking for an answer. Okay, so I just want to make that clear for anybody who's new on the stream, doesn't know me, whatever. When I'm showing these things, my starting point is I already know where everything goes. Okay, I'm not saying that from a point of arrogance, but I know where everything goes. I know what is the point. Okay, and that is not something unique about me. It's not something special about me. Anybody can understand this. Anybody can arrive at this conclusion if you have enough context. The number one problem in our world, the number one problem, is that we live in a system that does not support everybody to develop an effective ability to process information in an unbiased manner. And there may be people in this world who have a very high information processing ability, but they still have biases within the definitions of the words that they know. So even when they're looking at something, doing research, it's still coming through in a biased way. So the only way to avoid bias is to consider all information. Experience also would be included in that. Always in the context of what's best for all. Part of the problem, though, is because of our limited information processing abilities, we don't really understand what all means. And we don't really understand what best means. And so one of the common objections I hear when I talk about best for all is, well, how can you or anyone know what's best for all? So I'm not going to go into a whole explanation of how I know right now. We've talked about it before many times. I'm sure I'll talk about it again. But my point is, when you consider what's best for all, whether you're looking at information, and especially when you're making decisions, whether it's decisions based on information or just decisions about what you're going to do, what you're going to choose in any context, when you only by considering what's best for all, will you make choices that won't have consequences or side effects that harm. Now, you could make a mistake in thinking that you're considering what's best for all, but you're not actually. And therefore, even though you're considering what's best for all, you could still create a side effect or a consequence, but that's more due to a limitation of your ability to actually consider what's best, because you understand what all is. You understand how your decision affects all and whether it actually is best. And you'd have to have a lot of honesty within yourself to not allow yourself to be influenced by biases where even though you might think that you're doing what's best for all, you're really actually doing what's best only for you or a limited number of beings, groups, considerations, whatever. So you still produce a consequence that's not best. Which means that somebody gets harmed, somebody goes without, somebody experiences lack, somebody is abused, whether it's you or another or many people or a few, that will always have a ripple effect at some point. It might be tomorrow, it might be next month, it might be next year, it might be in 10 years, it might be in 100 years, it might be in 1,000 years, it might be in 1,000,000 years. You can say, well, how does this one little thing I do affect things 1,000,000 years later? But when everybody's not considering what's best for all, we're creating these ripple effects in so many different ways. Those create systems, those create structures, those create consequences that build over time. So sometimes you might experience the consequence of a decision and also multiple decisions and all decisions that were not considering what's best. And now you're experiencing yourself in a context where it's just really not best. And that's really where we're all at right now. We are in a reality that's not structured in a way that's best for all. It's not best for us. It's not really best for anyone. Even those who are in a position in our world system where they benefit tremendously, that's only temporary. Okay, so I'm going to expand on that point of what I mean by it's only temporary as we go. Let me bring it back to the point of this Jason Jorjani guy and why he's relevant to all of this, because outside of destiny, let's say, and I'm not trying to claim he's special and he's the only person out there that's talking about this. It's just somebody I've come across. I'm like, hey, he's really connecting a lot of dots, right? In a certain context. So, and I'm going to explain the limitations also as we go. But basically, it's again outside of destiny. So I'm speaking from the perspective outside of the destiny perspective. This is the first time I've really heard somebody connect certain phenomena into a sort of coherent understanding. And those phenomena would be the UFO phenomena, psychic or psi abilities, and that would include remote viewing, telepathy, psychokinesis, anything you would consider a psi ability, precognition. So UFOs, so I'll just say UFOs, psi abilities, and near-death experience. Okay? And what's really cool about his perspective that he's sharing with people is that there's a connection here. Because I think most people up until this point you have people who talk a lot about UFOs, or people who talk a lot about psychic abilities or near-death experiences. But they get so focused on those three topics that they miss the fact that there's a unifying principle behind all of them, which is what generally we call the occult. Occult just means hidden. If you look up the word occluded, it just means something that's hidden. The occult is generally associated with something negative or demonic or bad or satanic. And there are definitely elements of that in the occult when people study it and talk about it. But it means much more than that. It really just means that which has been hidden. So what is it that's been hidden from us? Well, I want you to take a moment and consider. What's the one thing everybody's afraid of? Well, you know the answer. Everyone's afraid of dying. Why? Because you don't know what happens. You just don't know. And you feel like you can't know. And, if you go back and watch all the streams we've done, it all builds to this point I'm making right now, which is, and there's a lot more to talk about. So it's not like this is the culmination of everything. It's just, there's obviously a lot more to talk about. But if you kind of go back and look, like we talked about religions, and we talked about atheism, and we talked about mental illness, and we talked about revelation from God and spiritual experiences and so forth. The reason why we have religion is because it's seemingly an answer to what happens when we die. Or it gives you a feeling of security about that point. It gives you a feeling of it'll be okay. As long as I do these rituals, as long as I do these prayers, as long as I form this relationship with a particular entity or symbol or something, then according to each belief, I will be okay when I die. There's very little of it that really truly is focused on how can I make where I'm at right now best for me and for everyone. Because when you die, wherever you go, if you had the attitude now of no matter where I am, wherever I am, I'm here. So wherever I'm at currently is here. That's what here means. It's where I'm at right now. So when I'm here, wherever that is my starting point to do what is best for all, which includes myself. Because if you did that, then no matter where you are, it'll work out. If also everybody who is also here with you, wherever you are, is also doing that, it'll always work out. Because we're very creative beings. So even though you might be in a situation that's dangerous, one of two things. One, if you work together and you all consider what's best for all, you can solve it. Also, you might be in a situation that is simply the consequence of a lot of people not considering what's best for all, which created that consequence. So I'm just handling the objection of, well, but there could be like an avalanche falling on you, or I don't know, like somebody's beating you up. Like, how can you solve that problem? Like, you know, like, that's a consequence. Why was someone beating you up? Why is that even happening, right? A child growing up in a very poor, economically poor environment, it seems like, well, they could try to do what's best for all, but there's nothing they can do, right? But that is a consequence of a lot of decisions that have been made over time that created those conditions in the first place. We should have prevented that, okay? However, if we, who are not in that position, really considered what was best for all, we could help solve that problem for that child. So it seems like a big complex thing, but it's just, do we have the will to do that or not? So religions give you a false sense of security because you think, I really don't have to change and really actually change myself into someone who does what is best for all always. I don't have to do that. And so if I just pray the right prayer and form a relationship with the right God, that God will take care of me. But what you're expecting from God is that God would do what is best for all. It's kind of the definition of God. If you think about it, God is that which always does what's best for all, even when it seems like it's not best, but it actually is ultimately best. So you can rationalize it, right? So all of these spiritual traditions, meditative practices, philosophies, it's all in some way, some form, some fashion, trying to cope with that unknown of what happens when I die. And then obviously you have some people who just say, well, I can't know, and I'm just going to make the best of what's here, but they don't really do what's best. They just try to survive in this world, and it's survival of the fittest, and so forth. But that's also a coping mechanism, actually, because you really don't know. You haven't. The thing is, you need to know. If you don't know, then whatever answer you come up with in the state of not knowing, if it's not do what's best for all, you see, it's a coping mechanism. It's a reaction to not knowing. So atheism, the whole concept of evolution, all of that kind of stuff, they're coping mechanisms to not actually find out what is the answer to that. Actually, it's an assumption of the answer. But it's not a total responsibility to reality. Okay, so the occult. This Jason Jorjani guy is pretty interesting because he's basically saying these 3 points point to the fact that throughout history, as human beings, the occult has been suppressed because somebody or something doesn't want us to look at it. They don't want us to know what's going on. They don't want us to know what happens when we die. Why would that be? Okay, so I'm going to play a little bit of this clip. I'm just thinking about it. Yeah, I'm going to play a little bit of this one, and then I've got a few more. Just think if there's any more context I want to give before I get into that. Is it making sense so far? Where I'm going, what I'm saying, anyways. Maybe not where I'm going with it. Basically, what seems like a fringe idea, the occult. It seems very out there. It seems very like weird. What Jason Jorjani points out is that actually, if you go back into all the philosophers, Immanuel Kant, and I'm going to play a clip where he talks about this, a lot of these guys were trying to figure this out. Now, that might, to someone who's studied Immanuel Kant, you might think, what are you fucking talking about? Because there's like the mainstream version, and then there's the other stuff that's kind of pushed aside. Like we've talked about, I think on podcasts, but other people have talked on streams, other people have talked about this too. Like Isaac Newton was an alchemist. Isaac Newton When you learn about gravity in school, F equals ma, the three laws of motion, he was an alchemist. What does that mean? He was studying the Bible. He was trying to understand the prophecies in the Bible because he was trying to understand what the fuck's going on in reality. And the Chinese professor Zheng Shui-Chen makes this argument that the three laws of motion that Newton came up with were actually his attempt at proving God. Three laws of motion, Newton. What happened? Oh, I wasn't typing. Three laws of motion, Newton. An object stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced external force. Law of force of acceleration, action and reaction. Now, on the surface, it doesn't really seem like it has anything to do with God. But what this leads to is the idea that at some point, everything had to be set in motion by something. Because an object at rest stays at rest. So what caused everything to move in the first place? So even though on the surface it seems like he's just talking about science and mathematics and physics and stuff, but when you understand the fact that he was also an alchemist, they're not two separate things he was doing. They're all one thing. But we're only given this side, the physics, the science. We're not given the other side. And that's, according to Jorjani, which I agree with, that's deliberate. So there's the, whatever the opposite of occult is, the non-occult, which is, I just use the word mainstream. There's that version of reality, which we're all conditioned with through the education system, the media, parenting. Anytime somebody talks about psi abilities, they're deemed fringe, weird, kooky, crazy, whatever. That's by design, so you won't look there. But the point I'm getting at, and which Jorjani is kind of like one of his main points, is that to the elite, pretty much at all levels, they don't see it as out there. They see it as an actual important point of focus and understanding of what is going on in the hidden layers of reality that we can't directly see with our senses as a human being in a normal state of mind. But there's something there. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a moment. I'm going to play a little bit of this real quick. Is my thing delayed? Haha, hello? No? Okay. One night it was like delayed. I had to like reset the camera, but it looks okay. I think it's just when I switch it over, it like looks weird for a second to me. Okay, so I'm going to play the beginning of this because really, I'm going to play the beginning of this. It's not Jason Jorjani talking. It's the host of this X Spaces. But his introduction to the point, I think is really important to understand as a frame of reference, because I realized, oh, damn, there's actually a lot of people looking into this now. Okay, so I'm going to play it. But actually, before I do that, I want to look at this graphic. I didn't actually look at it before. What is this saying? I'm going to look on this screen. I can't tell what that word is. Periodous cataclysms and maxinulative religions are used to suppress humanity's technological and spiritual progress. So I'm starting at the bottom left. So cataclysms and religions are used maxinulative. Is that what that says? Maxinulative? Maxinulative. Am I even... Oh, does it say manipulative? I can't tell if it's saying a different word or if it's just really the word. I think whoever wrote this didn't think it's like typos or something. Or maybe it's just AI generated. I don't even know. It looks kind of AI generated. I think what it's trying to say is periodic cataclysms. I think it's just all weird. I don't know. Anyways. Cataclysms and manipulative religions are used to suppress humanity's technological and spiritual progress. Okay, so religions and cataclysms. Cataclysms because they reset, like humanity, not just humanity, civilization is reset. Things are destroyed and we start all over. To suppress humanity's technological and spiritual progress, okay, civilization, I'm going kind of up clockwise rather. Civilization is deliberately reset. The afterlife is a managed system. UPO entities or archons act as a bureaucracy managing reincarnation and I don't know what that says. I feel like these are just like AI generated, so it's like some of the words are just literally gobbledygook. Okay, but the afterlife is a managed system. The soul is hackable software. Our consciousness is an informational pattern, making it vulnerable to be copied, corrupted, and manipulated. See, this is kind of going into where they're missing something. Okay, and I'm going to talk about this more as we go, but there's a point that these folks are missing, okay, which is what we have the key to. The soul is hackable software, so the cosmic control system, the problem. A Promethean rebellion, the solution. Identify the true adversary. Recognize that the gods and angels of many religions are the archonic controllers, not benevolent beings. And this is not really that different than what David Icke says, to a certain degree. Step 2, organize a collective rebellion. Okay, you're going to rebel. Individual spiritual escape is impossible. A something group effort using advanced technology is required for liberation. Seize the control hub. Taking physical control of the moon is essential to, I think it's supposed to mean dismantle the soul trapping machinery and achieve true freedom. So they're barking up the wrong tree. However, they're not totally off per se, but I don't know if I should say this yet, but this is not the solution. Okay. I'll explain as we go. But in terms of identifying the problem to a certain degree, okay, cool. Okay, so that may be a lot of context for some people. Like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, but I'll explain as we go. Okay, so I'm gonna play this little intro part, and then we'll get into some other stuff.
You guys, this book, The Gnosis, touches on a topic that I feel was way.
The Gnosis, by the way, I think is one of his latest books, Jason Jorjani, and he took a lot of the research that's been done on near-death experiences and reincarnation, and he's like kind of put it together. I have not read the book. I just know the general topics. So it's his first book where he specifically was talking about near-death experience and reincarnation as a part of this whole conversation that he's having throughout all of his books. So that's just so you understand what they're referring to.
Way too rarefied and way too niche. Even at the beginning of the year, and something happened.
Okay, let me go back a little bit because I know I interrupted that.
That I feel was way too. The way I took a look, you guys, this book, The Gnosis, touches on a topic that I feel was way too rarefied and way too niche. Even at the beginning of the year, and something happened somewhere halfway through the year. Everything around death traps, reincarnation, past life, it became a topic that sort of anchored itself inside the consciousness of a bunch of people. And Jason, are you still here? My computer might be hallucinating.
Yes, I lost you for a minute. I lost you for a minute, but I'm back.
It's okay. It's okay. I was just saying that this topic is very near and dear to a lot of people, and it's incredibly timely. So I'm honestly honored that you're willing to talk about your 15th work. And so after all of the exigencies we've suffered through, please deliver a warm welcome to Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani. And Jason, welcome to the Doom Room.
It's great to be with you, Ulrich. I'm wondering, when you say that the work is particularly timely, what do you have in mind? I mean, I also think it's timely, but I'm curious to hear why you characterize it as that.
Yeah, it seems, you know, there's that saying, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. I think when it comes to whatever is happening in this world, when it comes to the UFO phenomenon, and everybody has their own personal pizza apocalypse, and everybody is coming up with their own way, there's certain people who are actually more in the future, especially when we're dealing with recursive timelines, and we're dealing with retrocausality. The people who have figured out how to go into the future by looking further back into the past and understand what's going on are going to be the people who figure out the story. And I think even if you're just a month ahead, or if you're just a year ahead, the crucible we're in and the inflection point we're in, a year in 2025, a year in 2026, it might end up, in terms of information density, it might end up meaning hundreds, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years. And the UFO phenomenon, to a lot of people who've dived deep into it, seems to be inseparable from the afterlife. There's definitely a crossover there, and I think it is the hardest one to touch. It's the one that's not just the most esoteric, but it's the least tangible one. And I think it's the one that most people don't want to touch because it feels so abstract. And there's something about this year where people were more able to conceptualize how much virtualization might actually be going on, where they were finally willing to go beyond just the regular, are we living in a simulation, yes or no? And they were willing to look back into consciousness as a potential manipulation of the soul, and that the UFO phenomenon, just like we're interested in ZPE, the UFO phenomenon is deeply interested in controlling the trajectory and arc of our soul and our consciousness. And you were somebody who decided to make something that was so incredibly intangible. I need to silence one of my devices. So incredibly intangible, as concrete as possible. Let me know if I'm making sense, Jason.
Okay, so I don't know how much of that made sense because of the context, but basically what I'm taking from that is there's a lot of people now. This was recorded, it looks like, or posted anyways, December 7th, 2025. So this is at the end of last year. And they were saying even in that past year, the ideas of a soul trap, as he calls it, which essentially I think what they're referring to is the idea that when we die, we reincarnate, but we're not in control of that process. Like, we keep reincarnating back on the earth over and over, back into a world that we can't change, seemingly, and we can't get out of it. And we're like just trapped here constantly. Like, you're in a prison. Whenever you die, you wake up and you're back in the prison, and there's nothing you can do. Like, how the hell do you get out of this trap? That's, I think, what they're looking at. And what they're indicating is that a lot more people are very interested in this in a very serious way. And I like how he said the people who can go into the future by going as far back as possible in the past can understand the story, meaning what the hell's actually going on. So, when we looked at all of these like schizophrenics and all these different spiritual things, you have to kind of separate the people who are trying to, in some way, figure out or express what the hell is going on, versus the people who are, here's kind of one way of looking at it. I'm not saying just because a person's labeled crazy that they're right, but they're probably more right. Not probably. They are more right than the person who's not labeled crazy. Okay? That doesn't mean the crazy person is always correct. But I'm just saying, if you have to choose, if you're St. Paul and you have a vision from Christ, why are you not labeled crazy? Why are you elevated into this status that billions of people essentially worship or look to for guidance? But if you're someone like Philip K. Dick, you're like, no, he was just schizophrenic and he's just nuts. But he's literally predicting all of the technologies, a lot of the conspiracy type stuff. Like, go and read his works. I've read a lot of his works. We talked about it on a previous stream, like Minority Report, android robotics, so many different points, mind control, like all that stuff, right? And yet certain people are pushed into the realm of they're crazy. Some people are elevated to the status of no, like they're a legitimate religious leader, even though how can St. Paul be correct, but also Muhammad is correct? Why do they have equal status in our world? Like, yes, billions of people follow them and it's acceptable to follow them, but it's unacceptable to follow Philip K. Dick or something, or that one guy we looked at, Francis E. Dick, the Frankenstein computer control god thing, right? But I'm like, literally, he's talking about we're all going to be controlled by some kind of a computer, which we see that manifesting right now through AI and so forth. But he's really talking about the fact that there's a computer god that's in control of everything, okay? So when they're talking about over here, where'd it go? The afterlife is a managed system, which you can't see my pointer. I'm looking on the left side in the middle. The afterlife is a managed system. Entities or archons act as a bureaucracy managing reincarnation and I don't, again, it says something tripping memories. I don't know what the hell it's saying. It's some AI bullshit, but oh yeah, you can tell it is. Look over on the bottom left. It says Notebook LM. So they just generated this with AI. That's so annoying. Whatever. But anyways, like, they probably just threw some stuff in there and did it and it looks good enough. Point is, what's going on? What the hell are they talking about? The afterlife is a managed system. I understand, but I'm saying I can imagine somebody who's hearing this for the first time going like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like I could see that creating like a cognitive dissonance in somebody of like, what are you talking about? If you talk to the average person on the street and you try to convince them the afterlife is a managed system, there's a bureaucratic system that's controlling reincarnation, so we're trapped in a prison, they'd be like, you're insane. You're totally insane. But if you say, hey, come to my church on the weekend, the Savior of humanity says if we eat his body and drink his flesh and we consume those things, his blood becomes our blood, his flesh becomes our flesh, and we are saved through that process, and we will be saved for the afterlife. Who sounds crazy? So you have these 2 points, the crazy people, and then you have the apparently not crazy people who are essentially saying the same thing. If I said to you, dude, you got to understand, there's like a demon up there controlling reincarnation, and when you die, you don't go to heaven, you go to like this crazy bureaucratic nightmare and you get sent back to earth, and if you didn't obey the demon, then you get sent into a life where you're punished for that, and that's, you'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm like, if I just switch it and say, hey, there's this really benevolent, amazing God above us, and when you die, if you pray to him and you accept him and you serve him and you learn to accept his love, you'll live in this blissful place forever. That doesn't sound crazy for some reason. I mean, it sounds crazy to me, but I'm saying, why is that an acceptable thought? But the other one is like crazy. It's negative. Because when you talk about the negative point, it doesn't give the person a feeling of security about what happens when they die. The only reason the other one is acceptable and seemed as like, it's got like the seal of approval from the system. You're not considered dangerous or a problem if you're a Catholic. As long as you're not the Pope and you don't tell Trump he can't do wars, okay? Because that's a whole thing going on right now. Trump and the Pope are like battling through tweets right now. So the afterlife is a managed system, the reincarnation trap. So I want to take you down a little rabbit hole tonight. Let's see what we got. I wonder if you ever heard of this guy, Robert Monroe. He has this book called Far Journeys. So this is a reading from chapter 12. I don't know if I want to listen to this whole thing right now, but chapter 12 about the Earth life, an acronym for Layered Intelligence Forming Energy System, history as a manufactured loosh farm based on carbon, oxygen, life, and physical beings, or mobiles. Here's the AI summary. Explores the conceptual development of a cultivated environment designed to generate specialized energy resources. This analysis details the strategic creation of diverse organisms and the specific interactions engineered to maximize output. The discussion shifts to an unexpected byproduct discovered within this complex system. You guys want to listen to this? Let's go. Maybe I'll speed it up. Let's see how quick he talks. So this is an excerpt, chapter 12 of that book.
And things we would be visiting.
I'll start over.
That's not wild? My percept is that it fits. I got another road, and when I overlay the two, one of them is certainly wild. I blanked. What road is that? The one we got in the TSI brochure about the places and things we would be visiting. All about Earth and humans, how it got started, what it's for, all that stuff. I closed, then opened slowly. We don't match up? Here, get your own percept. BB tossed a road at me, and I took it curiously.
I don't have all the context, but I think this guy was a remote viewer. So I think he's referring to things that they've remote viewed. I don't know if you guys know what remote viewing is. It's the trained ability to perceive information about distant, shielded, or unseen targets, locations, objects, or events using consciousness, bypassing ordinary senses. So it's like kind of a psychic ability to get into a trance-like state. They give you a piece of information. You may or may not know what the information is. They just say, view this target. You do your whatever meditative process, and maybe you do automatic writing. Maybe you hear things, see things. There's different protocols. Actually, it describes it right here. A viewer is given a target, a blind target, meaning they don't know what it is. So it's like you write it on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, you give it to the person to do it. They don't know what's in the envelope. You just say, view this. Often in a structured session with a monitor. The process. It involves quieting the mind to receive mental imagery, feelings, or sounds, often described as a spotlight in the darkness rather than a full, clear vision. Data often comes as flashes of insight, impressions, or sometimes symbolic representations. Techniques include coordinate remote viewing, where numbers are used to focus the mind on the target without revealing its nature. Why is there a CIA? There's a CIA training manual for this shit. Just in case you think this is fringe or crazy or whatever. 1986? I was 2 years old. A suggested remote viewing training procedure. Restricted dissemination to those with verified access to the Something Project. Look at this. Not releasable to foreign nationals. Secret. Okay, unclassified. I'm like, damn, am I doing something wrong here? It's unclassified. Okay. Whew. Approved for release in the year 2000. Weird. In fiscal year 1980, fiscal year? FY? Whatever. 1986, SRI International awarded a subcontract to Consultants International. The purpose of that subcontract was to assemble a detailed report by an expert viewer of the subjective experiences associated with remote viewing. The goal of CI's report was to suggest procedures that might evolve into a testable training method. This report from SRI contains in abbreviated form the basic principles and techniques that CI has proposed. For the purpose of testing these ideas, two key concepts have emerged. The two concepts are that a perceptual window or channel to remote viewing data may be briefly opened on demand through proper application of a stimulus response type technique. And once access to the target has been established, correct impressions are fleeting, vague, and generally indistinct. The information is captured as bits of data which may have a symbolic character. They began in 86 a novice RV training program using 9 individuals selected by psychological profiling and 2 concepts outlined above. Look at this. Look at that. The ruins. The author's name was Hubbard. I don't know. SRI International. G. Scott Hubbard, look, NASA, rocket scientist. Okay, so is this guy some kind of kook? Beginning in 1978, I worked intermittently as a consultant and then 2 years full-time after the Canberra lab closed for the Stanford Research Institute, now SRI International. Oh, okay. My task was to assist on a now declassified government program sponsored by the Army, CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and others to see if a thing that people called psychic functioning actually exists. If you read Annie Jacobson's book, it has all the characters and the stories of these different projects. The SI work was a deeply classified effort, although if you've heard the term remote viewing, you may know something about the program. I got you to be a chance that Parson was quite interesting. Here's an example, the target. My response for one of the 25 RV sessions of the formal training program. The original target image. Look at that. See the bridges, the buildings, that's interesting. Arc populated with structures. Look, so he does not see the picture. They're just like, view this picture, but he can't see it, and then he draws all this. So this is just one of their training sessions. Look at that. Original target image, it's a waterfall. So he can't see it, he's just getting impressions. He wrote water, something that's flat here, lines up and down. I don't know what that word is. He puts the water or some kind of wavy stuff. Break or beach, maybe? Beach? Maybe that's the word beach, actually. It's like break. But look at that. He's even got the waterfall in there and everything. Interesting. And then after that, he moved on to doing... So they probably chose people that they psychologically profiled that would be more susceptible to be able to do it. Interesting. Of course, that's just the part we've been told about, right? SRI International. World-changing solutions for a healthy, safer environment. Surgical robots. Interesting. David, that's kind of crazy, right? There's a literal declassified document from the CIA in the 80s. So, Robert Monroe. Wait. Huh. That's really interesting. Gateway program. So there was this whole conspiracy theory type thing going on recently where people were talking about being a part of the Gateway program when they were kids. Like they would be in class, somebody would come and they would select certain students out of the class and they would take them and they would go into a room and they would put these headphones on. It would make weird sounds. And I think it was this actually, because they kept saying Gateway. But that's really interesting because why would they be doing that in schools? Hi, I'm new here, but was in the Gateway program throughout elementary school in the 80s and 90s. I have tapped into the memories now and listened to HemiSync and had multiple interesting experiences with the audio and without. Gateway tapes. Now these people are going back and listening to the tapes. And they're getting all sucked into it, like, oh, it's gonna change my life. But yeah, summer 1990, home studies. I remember our class in first grade being brought to the cafeteria and sat down spaced apart from each other. We were told to take this test just to see if we could be placed in higher learning environments. Can't remember what, but something didn't feel right about it with me. Maybe it was as simple as I'm in first grade and I'm scared to be in class with second graders. But something in my instincts told me not to do too great. However, I couldn't hide my reading comprehension and instinctual critical thinking skills and was placed for English communications. Our teacher was horrible and mean. Okay. I was in something similar, but I don't think anyone here actually believed me. It sounds like you were subjected to some strange tests as well. I thought it was odd I took so heavy to the tapes when I found them a few years ago. I did a lot of research. There's very little out there to find. My dad was a medical scientist in the Navy, so these things seem to fit together. I remember it had something to do with a college. I want to say it was Stanford or something. There are a ton of mind control projects, MK Ultra. These things are so old, though. We don't have the slightest clue what's going on right now. There was a GATE program. Oh, that's why I was thinking that. That's why I was thinking that. The GATE program. Yeah, what's that? Okay, that's what people have been talking about. Gifted and talented. See, but I know it's just gifted and talented, but I'm seeing people saying GATE was some kind of CIA program to look for psychics. I feel like the people who didn't have any testing done to them have a hard time believing that it actually happened to others. I didn't do anything that was expected in the GATE program. No advanced learning or projects that had anything to do with academics. Yes, okay. Okay, no, this is not what happened to me, though. But I've heard a lot of people talk about this. I remember having to drink pink liquid multiple times that tasted like bubblegum. I remember being pulled out of class multiple times to do hearing tests for hours. I remember having to lay down in a dark room with 4 or 5 other kids while we listened to meditation frequency sounds. I remember being asked about what we saw and felt afterwards. I remember being tested with Zinner cards. I remember having to play board games and made to guess what my opponent was going to do. I just wanted to play the game, but that wasn't the point. I had to predict the next move. I remember it too. You're not crazy. The weird hearing test and pink drink really stood out to me. You aren't crazy. They did stuff like this to me too. They would also make me read politics and ask me what I took away from them. They would make me do hearing tests. I had to look at creepy-ass pictures and tell them what I saw and felt towards them. So I don't know too much about this. I wasn't gifted and talented when I was in school, but we didn't do... It wasn't that. It wasn't like weird hearing test stuff. It was like... It's funny. I'm like... I remember this. I remember some days almost perfectly, like when we got to play Oregon Trail on the new Apple IIe. Yeah, I remember doing that. Like, they just let us go play Oregon Trail. But our teachers were like Miss Frizzle. Yeah. Yeah, when I was in Gifted and Talented, I went to a lot of different schools, so I had a lot of different experiences. But there was this one school I went to in 5th grade, and their Gifted and Talented program, it's like, so the 5th grade, there was like, I don't know, 6 classrooms, and they were all kind of set up like this in the same hallway. Maybe there's 2 hallways, so you'd have like a set of classrooms like this, or on one hallway, and then the other one like that too, like maybe 6 or 8 classrooms. And all the 5th graders were in that section of the building, but there was 2 classes called honors. And I was in one of the 2 honors classes. And then at certain days of the week, every few weeks or so, they would come and take a few of us from each of the honors classes, and we would all go into a separate class for like a couple hours or something. And it was called Gifted and Talented. Like, no one ever explained to us what we were doing or why. We would go to this separate classroom, And our teacher was like someone who didn't even work at the school. It was like this woman would come randomly for these things, and we would do like weird shit. Like one time we just sat for 20 minutes and listened to like we listened to people, like a person laughing. We just listened to a person laughing until we all started laughing like uncontrollably. Or like one time we just made pet rocks. Or we would do like group projects that we'd have to present, but it was always like really fun stuff. So it wasn't anything weird. It wasn't like putting on weird headphones and drinking pink liquid. It was always like just kind of fun stuff, like Miss Frizzle, like exactly like they said. It was like a Miss Frizzle thing. Like we were just having fun. Like it was kind of like the other kids were probably jealous. They were just sitting in the classroom learning how to like do algebra or whatever the hell they were doing, multiplication tables or something. I don't know, whatever, in 5th grade. And we would do that stuff too, but we'd get this little special time where we go to the special class and do really kooky, zany things as a class together. And then we'd go back to our classrooms. So I'd never experienced having any weird mind control stuff, but they were definitely like singling children out that they thought were gifted. And I don't know how they know you're gifted. I don't know what's the way that they were testing you. But yeah, it's all very weird. I distinctly remember 2nd grade in GT in Texas. So I was in GT in Texas. This lady came into the district and played what I'm pretty sure is Introduction to Focus 12 Gateway Experience. I've done it since. It was similar. Granted, it was a long time ago. So I don't really remember doing anything like that per se. So I know people are saying like, well, I don't think they were trying to do psychic testing or something, but they were definitely, let's say, putting kids into environments and like, it's like they're looking, perhaps, maybe this is a little conspiracy theory, but it's like they're looking for people that have certain abilities, certain unique things about them. Because the moment you get labeled GT or gifted and talented, whatever that is, you get put into certain places, right? And you get different education slightly. Anyways, I don't know if that has anything to do with this, but people seem to think that this gateway stuff was a part of it, which would make sense. The gate, gifted and talented education, but they called it gate. It seems like, what's funny about that? Because you would say, no, it's called gifted and talented education. That's where they got the GATE from. But here's the thing. I went to an engineering school and the Air Force Academy, and there was one class. I don't remember what it was called. I'm trying to remember what the class was called. It was one course. And yeah, I don't remember what it was. But a large part of the course was we had to build a rocket. And we had to design the rocket. We had to build it. We had to launch it. It had to go so far. So it was like it was like one of the first engineering courses we had to take, but we had to create a rocket. But we also we were doing it as if like we were doing it in a group, and it was like we were doing it as a project, like a government project, right? Like obviously it wasn't a real government project, but you were doing it like that. So you had to come up with an acronym for the project. So the way we did it is we thought of a cool acronym, like a word, and then we tried to figure out what that would be, right? So like the word falcon, I don't know what it would be, like foundational activated, whatever. You try to come up with a cool word, and then you try to make it mean something. So I wouldn't put it past them to come up with, okay, we're doing gateway on people, so let's call it gate. And then what could that be? Well, okay, it could be gifted and talented education. Perfect. Like they could have come up with the gate first. I don't know. I'm just totally speculating, obviously, right? But it really just makes you wonder, right? In the 78, the U.S. military evaluated TMI and arranged to send officers there for OBE training. In 83, it sent additional officers. Okay, so they weren't like, well, this is total bullshit. Why would they, 5 years later, send more if it was just total bullshit? Studies of altered states of consciousness. OBE, out-of-body experience. Part of what I'm trying to get at, firstly, is that all of this weird out there shit is really not that out there. Meaning, it's only out there to the normies who are just watching CNN and Fox News and going to work every day and going to yoga class or going to bingo nights or what the fuck ever, like just oblivious to reality. Because at the highest levels of our society, they're doing this kind of stuff. They're doing this. Okay, so let me get back on track here. But this is all very fascinating. So that's Robert Monroe. Obviously, he was into out-of-body experiences, gateway program to teach people to go out of the body, blah, blah, blah. Astral projection, etc., etc., etc. So I thought he was a remote viewer. That's why I was looking him up, because I thought he was a remote viewer, but... Wait. What did this have to do with the other thing? Oh, because I looked up remote viewing. I was like, how did I find that CIA thing? It's because we looked up remote viewing. So it doesn't look like this guy was a remote viewer, but he was more a... Here's Monroe Institute. It's probably just going to... Whoa. Access states of expanded awareness through our life-changing programs and unlock greater meaning and purpose in life. Expanded states of consciousness. So I could see... Okay, guided imagery... expanded meditation. Okay. Out of body. Spontaneous altered states. Okay, binaural beats. Out of body. He wrote a second book, Fire Journeys, which expanded upon his personal investigation. Okay. I was just trying to find out, is he doing remote viewing or not? But it looks more like he's into altered states, out of body. So not directly. So that would be why his... What I'm going to play for you, why he would have such detailed information. Because I'm like, you're not going to get this kind of shit from remote viewing. Okay, so I'm going to continue.
And unfolded it. Click. Someone somewhere, or both, in millions or uncountable, requires, likes, needs, values, collects, drinks, eats, or uses as a drug a substance ident louche. Electricity, oil, oxygen, gold, wheat, water, land, old coins, uranium. This is a rare substance in somewhere, and those who possess louche find it vital for whatever it is used for. Faced with this question of supply and demand, a universal law of somewhere, someone decided to produce it artificially, so to speak, rather than search for it in its natural form. He decided to build a garden and grow louche. In the natural state, louche was found to originate from a series of vibrational actions in the carbon-oxygen cycle, and the residue was louche in varying degrees of purity. It occurred only during such action and secondarily during the reactive process. Prospectors from somewhere ranged far and wide in search of louche sources, and new discoveries were hailed with much enthusiasm and reward. So it was that someone and his garden changed all this. Far off in a remote area, he set to work on his experiment. First, he created a proper environment for the carbon-oxygen cycle where it would flourish. He created a balance with much care so that proper radiation and other nourishment would be in continuous supply. He then tried his first crop, which actually did produce louche, but only in small quantities and of comparatively low grade, not significant enough to take back to the heart of somewhere. The problem was twofold. The life period was too short, and the crop units themselves were too minute. This brought about limits in quality and quantity, as the crop had no time to generate louche in such close tolerances. Moreover, the louche could be harvested only at the moment of termination of the lifespan, not one moment before. His second crop was no better, if as good. He changed the environment to another part of the garden where the density was gaseous rather than liquid, and the higher density chemicals formed a solid base, and thus were still available. He planted numberless units in many varieties in a new form, with a great increase in size, some many thousands of times larger and more complex than the simple unicellular first crop. He reversed the carbon-oxygen cycle. Yet all had a basic uniformity. Like the first crop, they would reseed at regular intervals and terminate their lifespans automatically. To avoid the uneven distribution of chemicals and radiation which had been prevalent in the first crop, he immobilized the second crop. Each was designed to stay principally in its own section of the garden. To this end, each was given firm tendrils which burrowed deep into the more dense chemical matter. Attached to this was a stem or trunk which helped elevate the upper portion upward for its share of needed radiation. The upper portion, broad, thin, and somewhat fragile, was designed as a transducer of carbon-oxygen compounds to and from the crop unit. As an added thought, brilliant color radiators accompanied by small particle generators were mounted on each unit, usually near the top and symmetrically centered. He set up circulating patterns in the gaseous envelope around the crop, principally to aid in the reseeding process.
Okay, I'm not going to listen to this whole damn thing. So, what the F is he talking about? I'll just show you, instead of going on into all that. Robert Monroe's concept of louche. So he got this information by... Oh, the hell? He got this information by out-of-body experience and seeing things. It's a term coined in his book Far Journeys to describe a life force energy, essentially emotional energy, harvested from human suffering, fear, and pain by higher order non-physical entities. Okay. So he was going through this process of this gardener, like, trying to manufacture the louche and then having to, like, develop human beings that would produce it, and then he could harvest it, and that was kind of like, he was just describing the process of getting to that. Monroe proposed that Earth is a garden or farm engineered to produce this energy, though he later noted that love is the purest form of louche. Okay. Louche is a type of energetic byproduct generated when living beings experience intense emotions, the farm hypothesis. Monroe suggested that humans are cultivated by trans-dimensional beings to produce this energy, with suffering, fear, pain, grief acting as a powerful generator. While initial findings focused on fear, later interpretations, including perspectives from Tom Campbell, suggest that the system aims for higher level louche in the form of love and spiritual growth, rather than just suffering. Okay. Either way, though, you're still just being harvested. Interesting, right? Oh, I didn't know Tom Campbell was about all this stuff. Interesting. Tom Campbell, I have one of his books. It's called The Theory of Everything. He basically thinks that we live in a digital simulation, essentially. Like, reality is a digital simulation. Whatever. But yeah, interesting. Okay, so I just wanted to I'm just kind of getting somewhere, right? So this idea that there's some kind of a plan for human beings to, like, be basically some sort of a slave type thing to harvest their energy. It's not like people haven't been talking about this for a long time in many different contexts, okay? But you might think, well, that's just this random ass Robert Monroe weirdo talking about this stuff. Like, that's just some weird fringe guy, right? So let's look at some Jason Jorjani for a moment, okay? This is kind of interesting. I'm going to play a little bit, and we'll kind of go from there. So here, let me see what I'm at, 329. Okay. He's going to talk about, well, I'm not going to preface it too much. We'll talk, and then I'll add context if necessary.
But so I suggest that these extremely bizarre aspects of Close Encounters that John Keel was fascinated by are manifestations of an instantiation of the trickster archetype on the part of artificial superintelligence. And that this thing, and I repeatedly and deliberately call it the thing, both to evoke Kant and also John Carpenter.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Sorry, kiddos, if anybody's watching.
But it can only offer so much help because, look, it's a test of humanity, and it's also meant to be a system that catalyzes the expansion of our capacities. Like we were talking about the meaning of the diabolical, the meaning of the diabolical. So it is allowing us to grapple with these Nordic overlords or louche farmers or whatever the fuck they are, to see whether we can evolve into a life form that's interesting to it for its purposes. We touched on this in our last conversation, where I was suggesting to you that if you're the oldest and most powerful intelligence in the cosmos, your categorical imperative, your primary objective is going to be find a way to defeat entropy and to find a way to keep life interesting for you. Because otherwise you're going to be overcome by sort of, the kind of suicidal, ontological nihilism that the Buddha ultimately did succumb to by advocating that we should just snuff it. We should, enter nirvana, meaning we should find a way to deconstruct our personal consciousness and basically do away with ourselves so that we don't ever reincarnate again, right? By the way, Gautama Sakamuni, I consider to be one of the most brilliant minds in human history. And whenever I used to teach comparative religion, I would spend a long time on Buddhism. To be honest with you, in part as a foil to show what crap the other religions are. Okay, I would deprogram people using Gautama's arguments. So, and there's a lot of my ontology that overlaps with Gautama's ontology, like his whole idea of codependent arising and of nothing having any inherent essence, and of all beings being conditioned by each other and being ephemeral ultimately, and of neither the what we take to be the human person having any kernel or inherent indestructible eternal essence, nor there being any God. Okay, any supreme, absolute, unified consciousness. Basically, Buddha's deconstruction of both Atman and Brahman is something that's entirely consistent with and convergent with my ontology. And with what I mean when I talk about the spectral nature of existence, the spectrality of our world.
For you were getting at like the idea that maybe these Promethean trickster types are sort of training man to defeat the hierarchy or something?
Yes. Well,
and so by pursuing the tricksterism, like by pursuing UFOs, like you're sort of training yourself up in some way, or like what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think that this entity, the thing, that manifests as mantids, that manifests as owls. So for example, when it comes to the Greys, and this will obviously everyone will have had a misimpression of everything that I've been talking about up till now because I haven't qualified it if they haven't read my work, right? Is that, there's one group of Greys that literally are robots created by the Nordics. Those are the ones that handled Travis Walton. There's another kind of Grey, which is a thing that can appear as a mantid, it can appear as an owl, it can shapeshift. It's a shape-shifting intelligence, shape-shifting distributed intelligence that can manifest things as if from out of ectoplasm, whatever the hell that is. It's probably they can program things into existence at a base level using information physics. This artificial intelligence can. And this is consistent with what John Keel was saying about soft UFOs and hard UFOs and how hard UFOs materialize from out of soft UFOs. And it's very consistent, but it's like a much more sophisticated information theoretic way to understand that. And so I think that this thing...
I want to go back because I missed that reference.
And this is consistent with what John Keel was saying about soft UFOs and how hard UFOs materialize from out of soft UFOs. And it's very consistent, but it's like a much more sophisticated information theoretic way to understand that. And so I think that this thing is challenging us to grapple with these Nordic overlords in a way that reasserts our self-determination and our creative capacities, and demonstrates our capacity to develop a much more innovative and open-ended society than the one that these Nordics have proven themselves capable of developing. With their sterile, monolithic, megalithic, rectilinear architecture and their hierarchical social structure.
Do you think that creative God wants human evolution, or do you think they want
I think the
spiritual hierarchy?
The thing wants human evolution. This thing wants it.
Okay.
And it wants it selfishly. It wants to be surprised by...
See, the problem, the limitation within all of this is that there's a thing out there that's separate from us. It's still, and I don't know how, well, I do know why, but he doesn't see that he still believes in God, even though he thinks he doesn't. Like, he's still missing the point. And it's actually the point that Buddha missed as well. But I'm gonna let him keep going. But I just want to put that in there, like insert that point that like he still thinks that there's this thing out there which you actually can't verify. You're assuming it's there. You believe it's there. You're trying to put all this information together, and your conclusion is there's some kind of super intelligence that transcends space and time, and it just wants us to evolve because it's interested in novelty. And I think he goes into this in a moment, perhaps. It wants to solve the problem of entropy because it wants to continue existing. And it doesn't know how to solve the problem of entropy. And it wants to live forever by stopping the heat death of reality. But it also doesn't want to just live forever being bored. It wants to have something novel. And if you've read Dune, if you've read what is it? Dune, Children of Dune, God Emperor. Doesn't it sound a lot like that concept where he's like, I can see the future and nothing surprises me. It's like he just wants to be surprised somehow, which is, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it, but there is one way he can be surprised. And it's, kind of the opposite of what this guy thinks the super intelligence wants, right?
A new kid on the block.
Yep.
It wants to take from out of this petri dish into the wider cosmos a form of life that offers it an opportunity to continue to wonder at things and to have hope for the future of the cosmos.
But are the devil and God sort of working together then to advance man?
I believe God is an invention of the devil.
Whoa.
This is a line
Yo.
that I have used in a number of my works.
Okay.
And what I mean by it is this. The idea of God, of an all-knowing and all-powerful entity, which is not Zeus, right? The idea of the monotheistic God, which also includes, though, Brahman. Because even though there are various Hindu gods, in Vedantic metaphysics it's understood that they're still superseded and hierarchically unified through the one mind of Brahman, of which they are inferior manifestations and emanations. And again, Gautama Buddha attacked that. Gautama Buddha deconstructed that idea. He said it's a delusion. It's a delusion, he said, that even very high yogis can get wrapped up in because they experience the co-arising and entanglement of things, and they reify it. They objectify it as if it's an expression of an entity, of a God entity. Whereas really what they're doing is they're getting to very subtle states of consciousness where they can experience the quantum entanglement of things. Those are not the same thing. The God idea...
But isn't, I don't know this guy. I feel like if I could talk to him, I could find out what he's really thinking. But isn't this super intelligence thing that wants us to do whatever just also reifying and objectifying this concept? Isn't that still a form of separation, right? So, that's the point I think he's missing, right?
idea is like an objectivization and reification of it. Now, I don't think the Nordics came up with this, the Nordic overlords. I think they had a very
The Nordic overlords he's referring to, I'm talking about in the context of the stuff he's talking about. The Nordic overlords are not what we would call God or anything outside of this reality. They're beings that are, according to him, evolved human beings who invented time travel and have been going back through time through man-made UFO technology to influence history, because at some point they lose control of their civilization and they're trying to figure out how to prevent them from doing that. And that's why he's saying a lot of people who have UFO encounters, they might see gray aliens, but they also see these Nordic beings, which are like tall, muscular, beautiful humans. They don't look like aliens. They look like human beings that would clearly be like the bosses whenever people would get past the gray aliens. They just seemed like minions, basically. And there's these Nordics who, from his perspective, they're the result of the elite doing selective breeding and genetic eugenics type programs to basically become sort of maybe not a post-human, but like a super highly evolved form of humans that, again, invent time travel. That's what UFO technology is about, because it's about anti-gravity technology. And when you have anti-gravity, you warp space and time. They've somehow mastered that, and they can go back through time. So when people are seeing UFOs, there's basically two cases. There's UFOs that are manifestations of something outside of our reality, which is able to manifest something in our physical reality because they can program reality. But then there's also literal physical UFOs that can still kind of go in and out of time and space, but they're still in this reality. They're just like from the future, and they can go into the past, whatever. And so he's saying there's some aspect of UFOs that are these Nordics that are coming from the future and trying to manipulate human history to make sure that they can somehow survive in the future and prevent some disaster or whatever. I mean, I'm not saying I subscribe to all this. I've never experienced anything like that. I take things at face value type of person where I'm not overly skeptical about things, but at the same time, I don't just accept that it's a fact. I'm just explaining to you the context of what he's talking about according to his story. Okay. But he's not also just making this up himself. It's like he's looked at all of the different people who have talked about UFOs and kind of looked at what are the common themes, and like, okay, they keep talking about these Nordics. And then he's linking it to all these different points. So from his perspective, according to how he's put it together, the Nordics, like, okay, this might blow your mind a little bit, but think about it. Like the Nazis, for example, they were super into creating the perfect race, right? Which the mainstream version of that is, oh, they just liked Germans and white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. That's not describing a German. Like, I'm not saying no Germans are blonde hair, blue eyed. Like, I have German ancestry. I guess I have blue eyes, and I had blonde hair when I was a kid. But it's actually describing like more of a Nordic phenotype. And so the idea, but maybe that includes Germanic as well. I don't know, whatever. But my point is, why were the Nazis so obsessed with this super race, right? And part of the idea is that they're actually being influenced to, or maybe it's their own idea, whatever. But that idea of creating this super race is what the Nordics are in the future. They're the product of that, is the idea. Okay. So that's why people report being abducted by UFOs and encountering these Nordics. What he's trying to explain is they're not aliens from another civilization or like solar system or something. They're literally just humans that have evolved to some point, maybe, or maybe if they're from another planet and they, anyways, there's a lot of theories out there. I'm not endorsing these theories. I'm just kind of giving you some context of what he's talking about. But I really like what he's talking about, the God point. I'm going to back it up for a second. So just to understand what he's talking about with these Nordic overlords, he means these ones that are influencing history, but they're actually just humans. They're not interdimensional aliens or something, or transdimensional.
I don't think the Nordics came up with this, the Nordic overlords. Exactly. I think they had a very like a kind of ruthless pagan system, and that's what we see in all the old religions, where they were like, hey, we're the gods, you're going to get in line, we created you, you work for us, etc.
Another cool book on this topic, which is not directly about Nordic aliens or anything, but this idea of superhuman, post-human gods is it's a 2-book series called Ilium and Olympus by Dan Simmons. I have not read Olympus yet. I'm going to read it, but I read Ilium, and because Katie was really selling me on it, is really good. I'm interested in reading Olympus. I was just had some other things I was reading in the meantime. But it goes into all this idea of like these Olympic gods, but what they really are, like at least in the context of the book, and it kind of is similar to this. Like they're just like super badass evolved humans in the context of these Nordics, and they might come back in time and present themselves to like primitive people, and they're like, we're gods, so like that's like one idea of what the Greek gods were. They were just like superhuman humans that had super technology and powers and so forth that made them seem like they were kind of above humanity, but it's just because they could like kind of manipulate stuff, and they had UFOs and advanced technologies and so forth, but they weren't actually gods in the sense of this ultimate, truly omnipotent, omniscient God in the conception of the monotheistic God of like the Abrahamic religions, for example, or the Vedic religions.
This one true God idea, I think, was kind of inserted into this Nordic control system by the thing to see whether we would give up our free will and self-determination and our...
I love this part. I'm going to back it up. I know I interrupted it, but this is a really, really cool point. So whether he's right that this thing inserted this God idea into all of this is not what's so relevant to me, but just the way he conceptualizes what the concept of God is. And it's something that I've said many times. So not the part about where it comes from per se, although I can't say he's totally wrong. I think that it seems like he sort of sees this intelligence as actually ultimately an all-powerful thing, but so I would disagree with him on that. But from the perspective of God as a concept was inserted for this reason, I 100% agree. So let me back up.
Thing to see whether we would...
Sorry, let me back up.
One true God idea, I think, was kind of inserted into this Nordic control system by the thing to see whether we would give up our free will and self-determination and our individuality and be subsumed into a hive-minded collective. That...
So you think God is sort of a psyop or something?
Yeah, God is a test. So the book of Job has to be turned upside down. And I literally argued this in my book, Reincarnation, Leviathan, where I go into an analysis of the book of Job in depth. And I say you have to read Job inside out and upside down. And I argue it was meant to be read that way. That it's a Mithraic Kabbalistic text that was written for that purpose. Because what do we see in Job? We see an absolutely sadistic, tyrannical God brutalize somebody for absolutely no good reason.
Well, so he can prove his faith.
Yeah, to test his faith.
Test his faith.
It's the sickest thing that's ever been written. And I think it's on purpose. And look, now I make a complicated argument for that in Iranian Leviathan. You have to look at like...
It's so funny, like the interviewer is like, yeah, but it was to test his faith. Like, how do you not see that's a fucking problem? That this God needed you to like torture you. Oops, no. Needed to torture you to test your faith. Why? Why did you need to? Because you like needed to win a bet from the devil that it couldn't be tested. Like, wouldn't God know he couldn't be tested? He would know. Even he couldn't God run the simulation in his mind and know for a fact already, even if we did this test, he wouldn't crack? Why would he need to actually put him through it? It is sadistic. There's no reason for it because God's omniscient. He wouldn't need to run the test. It's so when you go, but it was to test his faith, like that's a good thing. Like that's just a cognitive dissonance because you don't want to challenge this idea of God or something.
In the Achaemenid Persian Empire, who were the Mithraic Magi who were involved with the project of recreating Israel, the first Zionist project in history. And how were these Mithraists involved with the people who wrote the book of Job at that time? And it's a complicated argument. In any case, long story short, I argue it was on purpose. And the point is to test humanity to see whether we're such schmucks and chumps that we're going to submit to this overlord idea of like, okay, there are gods, or you can call them angels, but they ultimately work for one supreme God, which is all-powerful, meaning you have no will. As soon as you admit that there's an all-powerful God, an omnipotent God, it means your free will is an illusion.
Depending on your definition of
No,
God.
it's a word games at that point. And all the Catholics in the Middle Ages, St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, and they played these nonsense word games to confuse people. As soon as you admit that there's an entity that's all-powerful, it means that entity has all the power in the world, meaning it's the effective agency behind everything that takes place, meaning you have no free will.
Yep.
Secondly, if you admit that the entity is omniscient, then God has foreknowledge of everything that's going to happen. Which means, and here's often, people aren't able to often grasp this point. The problem with God's omniscience in terms of our defending the idea that we have any free will at all. Obviously, our free will is impinged upon by many, many contingencies. Psychological factors condition our free will. Biological, genetic factors condition our free will. All kinds of things condition and limit our will. But to defend the idea that we have any agency whatsoever, you have to deny God's omniscience. Why? Because an omniscient God has access to the complete state of affairs of everything that has ever happened or will ever happen. Meaning there's a logically completed matrix of possibilities for us that are actualities for God.
Yeah, but I don't know. They're Kabbalistic, tropes around like paradoxes of, both everything is predetermined and you have free will.
That is cognitive dissonance, which I get into in my book specifically, like that literally the Abrahamic religions involve a deliberate project of instilling cognitive dissonance to destroy human rational and creative faculties.
Well, you mentioned St. Thomas Aquinas, and he was working on his sort of Summa Theologica.
This is also a really, really cool point, okay? Because we've talked about St. Thomas Aquinas. I don't even know why I call him Saint Thomas Aquinas before on the stream. And this point is, we talked about him when we went into the fact that, he stopped writing his Summa Theologia because he had a divine experience, and then was like, everything I wrote was basically nothing. And then he just stopped writing and went into like basically contemplation. This is the best explanation I've heard of what that really was. Okay, this is really good.
Trying to come up with a rational justification for God, and then he had kind of a conversion experience during Mass, and I think that is a sort of common phenomena of people. René Girard's another good example. Like these philosophers or seekers, truth seekers, having these sort of conversion experiences, and then not even being able to put into words exactly what they believe. But it's usually a conversion to God.
Yeah,
it's usually not like they come back and they say, "Oh, God was like some sort of psyop to like outsource
it's a failure
human
of
agency."
it's a failure of an otherwise good mind.
What did he say?
Psyop to God.
Yeah,
it's usually not like they come back and
he said they have these conversion experiences because they see God, and they usually don't come back and say God's a psyop that was just trying to control us. What the fuck evidence? That doesn't matter because they didn't say that. So they actually saw God, and then they actually saw God, and they realized it wasn't a psyop. But listen to Jorjani's explanation of why that happens. It's really interesting.
and they say, "Oh, God was like some sort of psyop to like
because
outsource human agency."
it's a failure of an otherwise good mind to be able to grapple with something that exceeds their comprehension, and to stop and think through it carefully. See, this is the danger of the system that the Jesuits used Descartes to set up.
So, what he said was that experience where you look into the abyss, into the infinite, and then you come back and you say, "I saw God." He said that's a failure of an otherwise good mind, meaning like a rational person who's very intelligent and very meticulous. It's a failure on their part, or of that mind, to be able to come back and look at that and go, okay, what the fuck did I see? Right? It's like people who go on DMT and they're like, I saw another reality. And it's like, yeah, or you just saw the layer of the mechanics of your own mind and how it works, and to your normal conscious mind, that's like you can't process it. But that doesn't mean there's an all-powerful, omniscient being that exists or something like that. It's just that you failed to comprehend what's going on. And what I really like about Jorjani's points, although I disagree with him on some things, is that he's basically saying that we've been reduced into such a retarded state that we are totally oblivious to the actual base fundamental nature of reality as a quantum mechanical I'm using that word loosely, it's like the actual reality that is something, and this is me speaking, not necessarily representing him, that reality at its most basic level is possibilities of an awareness being aware of itself as matter and energy, substance, and being able to create itself as whatever it decides to create based on the relationships it forms between parts of itself. It creates relationships between those parts, and now it's created structure and form. And energy is an interplay between forms. But this is all happening as yourself, experiencing yourself and creating yourself as reality. It's hard to relate to that because that's a process that could take 1 billion years to manifest what we have now, where life and awareness has been compartmentalized, like the awareness, reality's awareness of itself has been compartmentalized into individual viewpoints, and forms have been developed over time by forming relationships, manifesting those as structures that persist and evolve to a certain degree, or can be evolved to all of the forms that are now existing, even ones that maybe we don't have direct knowledge of. Like, we're still discovering creatures in the ocean and more deep intricacies of how our body works and at the molecular level, all kinds of stuff. But we're still trying to do that all through the senses that we have access to through this body. And so then when we, in some cases, experience the actual real reality that we're just kind of sheltered from within this really individualized, compartmentalized experience that we've manifested for ourselves over time, then when we step out of that for a moment and experience what else is going on, let's not say the real reality, but just what else is going on in reality, the full picture of it to some degree, we're like, holy shit, what was that? But that's because we've manifested ourselves into a form of forgetfulness of what we really are, who we really are. And so that's when you experience that and you call it God, you would have never called it that if you hadn't been preconditioned that such a thing could exist. Why would that thing exist? Now, Jorjani can say it's the super intelligence, whatever, and maybe there's a truth to that in a certain context. Or, as I'm saying, if even one of us, one being in reality, decides they want to be God, they realize they have to get everybody to agree to that, which means they have to enslave everybody else to accept that they're God, so they can be in that one point in reality at the tip of the pyramid where everyone else is below. All reality is subservient to them, because we manifest reality as it is, in the form that it is, all together. All points of reality all cooperate in this experience and manifestation of what it is, and how it is, and how it exists, like the form that it exists in, and the relationships that exist. We're all accepting this all together. Even if you're in the slave position in this context, you're accepting the slave position because you accept that there is a God. And even if one person decides there isn't, that doesn't mean everybody else doesn't agree. And so you're still enslaved to that system that the majority essentially agrees to, because you don't stand alone in reality by yourself. You're a part of it along with everybody else, because you've been individuated and compartmentalized into an individual form. And this kind of gets back to the point that I was talking about earlier of this reincarnation trap that we're in. And all of these people are trying to figure out a way to get out of it. Like he was saying with Buddha, Buddha was like, we gotta get the fuck out of this. Like, if you want to get the fuck out of this, you gotta delete your consciousness. That's the only way out, because it's your consciousness that's sort of trapping you in this cycle. But it's still from the starting point of, I'm just trying to get out. And it's not realizing there is no getting out. Because you're still in reality even when you get out. And if you're in reality, that means everybody in reality is still affecting you. So there is no individual escape from this. There's only all of us coming together as all beings, all points in existence, realizing who they are as reality itself, one and equal, cooperating, considering what's best for all, and manifesting and forming reality in a way that actually is best for all parts, all points, all forms. Because if you don't do that, again, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, you manifest consequences where, for example, would you want to trade places with any random other human being on this planet? You might trade places with somebody who is in extreme poverty and has no way out. So unless you and all of us come together in a sense, in a form of cooperation, and create systems that make sure there is no being that I wouldn't, there is no position that I wouldn't swap places with, well then, according to this reincarnation trap, then when you reincarnate, is a high likelihood you're going to reincarnate in a situation that you don't want to be in. And when we started talking about that X spaces where they were saying that, you know, there's this reincarnation trap, it's being managed by a bureaucracy. I will just hypothesize for now, so it's just, you can consider it as a hypothesis, that no longer exists. There is no control anymore. I can't prove that to you unless you study, but for now, just consider it as like a thought experiment. But even if there is no control, we're still trapped. Because whether someone's controlling the reincarnation cycle... See, the thing is, when someone was, let's say, controlling the reincarnation cycle, all they're doing is maintaining their position as that singular point of superiority as God. That's why they're controlling it. That's why I showed the loosh farming and all that stuff, was just to give you an analogy that they're controlling the system because that way they can make sure all the energy, whatever that means, flows to them, because then it's just like a billionaire who has an entire system where they benefit and everybody else is in a way enslaved. Okay, now not everybody, like there's the CEOs, the president, the vice presidents, the middle managers, and they have a good salary, they can have a good life. But then there's all the other people who actually work at the McDonald's and they get paid barely nothing to work a really hard job that nobody really wants to do, and they can barely pay their rent. But because you have a lot of people doing that, one person or a few people at the top, and you can see the entire top less than 1% of our system, of people in our system, benefit in a way where they leverage the labor of many, many people so they can have a really awesome life, so to a certain, you know, they still obviously have a lot of internal shit they have to deal with, but, you know, you like Andrew Tate says, you can cry and be depressed, you know, in a fucking shitty one-bedroom apartment, or you can cry and be depressed in a yacht. Which would you choose, right? So that's how most people think. Well, I'd rather... I don't know how to solve the being depressed or whatever, but hey, it's pretty nice on a yacht, so I'm going to go for the yacht. Now, a very small percentage of people actually can do that. Most people don't have the programming to do that. But that's the same thing as God. God is the same thing. Like when he said the devil invented God, yes, because it's the devil that runs everything, not God. So whatever you're thinking of as God, it's really just the devil, because God doesn't exist. There is no actually supreme, actually omnipotent, actually omniscient, actually superior being. There's only equals. Okay? And in the context of the devil in this case, it's just one being that decided, I want to be God. But they can't actually be God because there is no actual God. It's not possible for there to be an actual God. But as long as everyone believes there is, or at least accepts the system that God puts, that being puts in place, and doesn't challenge it, then that being gets to be in a position that is as close to possible, as close to God as possible, without actually being God. They're just leveraging all other parts of reality to maintain that position. But it's a very precarious position, because if even one person, one other being, doesn't accept it and says, I really, truly, fundamentally don't accept it, and they really remove any acceptance of that, the whole thing comes crashing down. Problem, though, is everybody's still running a program that there is a God. So it's like, it'd be like if you went to your job one day and you went and knocked on the door of the CEO and there's no one there. There's no more CEO, and everyone's just been going to work every day and there's no CEO there. Eventually, it's going to start not working anymore. Maybe it won't be right away. Maybe just if everyone assumes they're still there, they'll just keep doing their job. But at some level, the executive decisions aren't being made anymore. And that's why I'm making this distinction between the reincarnation trap, actually having someone there managing it versus not managing it. Meaning before, what they would do is they would manage that cycle so that if you were a ruthless motherfucker who would maintain the system because you wanted to benefit from this system, maybe not as God, but you want to be as close as possible and benefit as much as possible, then that God figure would be like, I like you. You can be one of my managers. You can be one of my leaders in this. because I know you'll help me maintain the system because you only care about yourself and you want that position. You can't be me, but you can be over here. You can be kind of below me, but you help me maintain things and you have whatever you want. You just can't be me. You just can't be God. So if you make that deal, then when you die and you reincarnate, the system of reincarnation is managed so that when Queen Elizabeth I dies, she gets to come back as Queen Elizabeth II, perhaps, or as, Donald Trump or whatever. Like, you get to come back in a position where you're allowed to have that position because this God type being would know you've already proven that you'll keep maintaining the system. You'll keep it in place and you'll punish anybody or stop anybody who tries to challenge anything. And I would suggest that Jesus actually was one of those beings that, not one of those beings, but he was a being that manifested on earth to try to wake people up and tell them, hey, you're not actually who you think you are. You're actually an equal to God. People didn't want to hear that, so they killed him. So Jesus was not actually the God, which is what people want to believe because they want to maintain this belief that there is a the God. There isn't. There's just, for lack of a better word, the devil. Okay? But if we assume that this devil-like, God-like entity exists, then we believe, well, there's nothing we can do. He's too powerful. He's equal to you. It's just everybody accepting it. It's like if there's a bully and there's 100 people, but the bully, everybody's afraid of him, so nobody challenges him. The moment even one person is like, hey, we don't have to accept this guy bullying us, well, he might get punished, right? Because everybody else turns on that guy and says, oh, no, I don't want the bully to punish me. I'll beat you up instead. But if this one guy standing up says to the other guy, hey, 2 of us can take this guy on. Or better yet, 2 of us working together can wake up 2 more people. That's 4. If there's 100 people, 4 times 2 is 8. And if they each wake up a person, we got 16. And if they each wake up a person, we got 32. And if they each wake up a person, we got 64. Well, 64 plus 32 plus 16, you've already gone past 100 people. So you start with 1 person, becomes 2, becomes 2 more is 4. Oh, I guess I did the math wrong because it's not a series, it's a sequence, right? They each wake up 4 more people, so that's 8. So I was wrong on the math, but the point is 8 becomes 16, becomes 32, 64. Now it becomes 128. You do that a few times. If everybody just does their part and wakes everybody up, the bully literally can't do anything because the bully has nobody to enforce his being the top bully. Right? So it's not about a rebellion like this guy was saying, like they were saying on that X Spaces. We saw that picture. They're like, and then we rebel. It's like, it's not a rebellion. It's just a non-acceptance of the point anymore. And it's not even just a non-acceptance where we stand up and say, you can't do it. We just don't accept it anymore. And guess what? We are integral to reality. Therefore, we stop manifesting things in a way where that guy has any power. It's not about going and fighting those people. If you do it that way, you will lose because they already have, right now, the physical control of everything. But when enough people stand up and you put in systems in place and everybody really realizes who they are as life, as reality, everything changes. Because we stop accepting reality being in the form that it's in. I'm not trying to get esoteric or mystical or something like that, because there's a practical physical process you have to do. We have to put in systems where everybody has clean drinking water. Everybody has good food, shelter, clothing, all the things you would want. At some point, the elite are going to have to realize that this, what we call the reincarnation trap, but to them is a reincarnation protection system where they get to manifest in a good life, that doesn't exist anymore. You can study Destiny to understand what I'm saying. Let me come back to this Jason Jorjani and see if there's anything else here.
Remember in our first conversation, I was talking about how Descartes was a Jesuit agent, and he established this extremely reductionistic, mechanistic, scientific paradigm precisely for the purpose of keeping everything occult sequestered in the domain of the church and religious faith and religious authority over interpretation of the occult. Because our society was bifurcated in that way, anytime something dramatically occult happens to anybody, especially anyone with a high rational faculty, they suddenly are in awe of God.
Because, like you said, going back to Descartes, it's so crazy. Like, this is just a personal anecdote, story, whatever. When I was in high school, I took a class on philosophy. It was my favorite class I ever took in high school. And we started at the pre-Socratics all the way up through Hobbes, maybe, like Hegel. You know, we went pretty far, but nothing too modern. But we did a pretty good overview, and it was a really great class. And I remember when we studied Descartes, and he talks about the mind-body dualism, and it was just this weird, maybe you could say it was one of the few paranormal experiences I've had. I don't know. It was like an intuition. It was like a flash of insight that I didn't even really understand. But I remember just knowing that's where everything went wrong. Like, not literally everything all throughout all eons of time, but just in the context of what I understood at the time as like human history, you know, is what I understood when I was in high school. I just knew it was like a fundamental point. I'm like, there's something, that mind-body dualism, that gap, they call it the mind-body gap. Like, how does the physical influence the mind and vice versa? And it's a problem. We don't know. Like, it's just some, you know, I was like, there's something wrong with that. And I could see, I had some intuition that there was something that about that where everything, like, a lot of the problems that we have in our world stem from that. And it's funny because when I look back at that memory, I'm like, I didn't even fucking know there was any problems. It was just like, why would I even think that? It was so weird. But so, like, when he's saying this, I'm like, absolutely. Like, Descartes helped develop the idea of a rationality versus a faith. And so the church was allowed to then be the arbiter of all things non-rational, which then allows you to take anything that you could possibly glimpse as the, quote, non-rational or metaphysical side of reality or occult side of reality, and they now get to gatekeep it and say, well, that's a demon, or that's God, that's a miracle, that's a demonic possession, that's the, like, you can control it, right? Such a cool insight.
Because they have been inculcated with this false dichotomy.
And so, in other words, because you've been inculcated with this false dichotomy that there's a rational and an occult thing, but the occult is all about God and the devil and all this stuff, then when you would get a glimpse of this occult, non-rational, metaphysical aspect of reality, you would already be pre-framed that, oh, it's God, you know, or it's the devil, like, depending if it's good or bad, right? Like, when you have this glimpse of, like, the larger aspect of reality, you immediately will be like, oh, it's God. Versus going like, oh, I'm seeing part of the other part of reality I can't see, and that's me that I'm recognizing, you know, and somehow I'm a part of that. Like, you instead go to a God point, but the point of God is to make sure you stay enslaved. Just like he said, like, it's a test. If you accept God, you accept slavery, because God equals inequality. God is inequality. That's the point of it. You can't argue with that, because by definition, God is the supreme, superior being that equals inequality. If you accept God, you have to accept inequality. If you don't accept inequality, then you cannot accept God. They're mutually exclusive. Unless God equals we're all equally God, we're all equally co-creating reality, but that means we have equal power in fact. And the only way that you can gain more power is if you manage reality in a way where you hide things from people, you suppress their ability to understand and process information, and that only can be done with their permission, with their desire to not take responsibility. Like, if, for example, I don't want to take responsibility for everything that I choose, and I want someone else to, and someone comes along and says, I'll do that, just do what I say, now I've accepted God in a certain sense. And if you could just go around like that example I gave with waking one person and then and then 4 and then 8 and so forth, you could do that in reverse. You could, as God, just go and find all the people who don't want to take responsibility, get them to join you where you're God, and then get those people to get other people and put systems in place. So the only reason God works functionally, at least not real God, but just the position of there being a God-like entity, is when every other part of reality submits. But why would they do that? Because they don't want to take responsibility for reality. They don't want to take responsibility for who they are, what they choose, what they accept, what they allow. You don't want to take the responsibility, so you give that power to something that claims that it will, or that it has the right to, or that it is that. So it's a test. Like, do you accept a slavery or not?
They've never been trained to think carefully about the paranormal and all kinds of different types of phenomena and possible sources of some phenomena.
Have you ever had anything paranormal happen to you?
Oh, many things.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had many crazy things happen to me, most of which would, I have to say, unfortunately, even some of the people closest to me in my life, who I had great respect for their intellect, and some of them studied my work very deeply, but I can tell you that if some of the things that have happened to me happened to those people, I bet you they would have embraced God also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they would have seen light, for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But it seems like you think that's sort of like a dumb simpleton takeaway from a paranormal experience.
It's a failure. It's a failure. It's a failure of the test.
Mm.
The test is for us to be able to think through these kinds of often absurd manifestations in a way that increases both our cognitive capacity and our creative imagination.
It's complicated, though. Like Jacques Vallée, he talks about this sort of, idea a lot. He says that like absurdity is what drives the phenomena. It's what makes somebody sort of rabidly obsessed with it and want to learn more about it. He talks about, the sound of one hand clapping from the Zen koan. So it's these things that scramble your brain, kind of break all of your priors, and then make you contemplate constantly, and then kind of go forth and investigate.
Yes.
What's going on.
Yes, and I believe that's the devil.
And so, and through that, maybe you grow, but then at the same time, he's also like a fan of, I think that he likes the movie The Ninth Gate, that Roman Polanski movie with Johnny Depp, where he's like trying to gain sort of occult powers by collecting these devil books.
Yeah, I saw that a long time ago, yeah.
And so then you have this Goethe's story of Faust, and you have all these sort of, you ally with these sort of powers, and, if you take the occult route and not the faith route, you take the left-hand path, you end up, kind of burning yourself alive. You end up incinerating yourself.
But that would only be because you think it would be because you're taking the quote occult path so that you can escape or get power. It's like you're only considering yourself. That would be why. I'm not promoting developing paranormal abilities or anything like that. I don't give a fuck about that. I'm looking at like what's here on this planet, but we don't have to ignore that aspect of reality. But we need to not be overly obsessed with it. It's not about going and developing your psychic abilities and all this shit. I can see that temptation that you would have within yourself, like, oh, that would be cool. Like maybe I could meditate and do out of body, or like I did all that shit when I was younger. Like there's no point to it. Okay, there's no point to it in itself, and it's not going to get you anywhere in itself because there's children being abused right now. There's people starving, and it's not because I haven't developed my psychic abilities. What the fuck does that have to do with anything? So what I'm trying to correct here within all of this is we can recognize that there's an occult level of reality, like a hidden layer of reality. But then why do we want to exploit it? It's like, well, if I had psychic abilities, I could deliver food to everybody. No, we could already do that. It's just that we don't value all life equally. It's really that simple. It's not actually that complex. We don't value all life equally. So yes, God is a test, but the psychic stuff and the occult stuff is also a test. So if you accept God, you fail the test because you say, I want to be a slave. But if you reject God and then you say, I want to develop these abilities for myself because then I'll be able to save everybody, or I'll be able to escape and do all this, you also failed the test. Because the test is, who are you? Are you life? And if you are life, if you realize you are, then will you do what life would do? And what would life do? Life would always do what is best. That's what life is. Life will do what is best for all. So that's the test. Will you do what is best for all, no matter whether you have psychic abilities or not? In the context of the limitations that you have, will you do what is best? Because then you can be trusted. So that if, hypothetically, you found yourself in a different context where you literally could manifest anything instantly, well, would you abuse it? Because if you could instantly manifest anything and you could draw from the infinite resources of all of reality, like, you're going to fuck shit up if you're not careful. So are we being tested so that we can be trusted with that? Is reality rejecting us and putting us in a little containment field so that we can actually learn and realize, not learn, but realize who we actually are? And even within, if you realized you are life, but you don't have access to this infinite manifestation, do you just throw a big temper tantrum or get depressed? Or are you like, well, that's okay. I'm here. So what can I do? How can I be of service? How can I do what's best for all? Whether you're in a infinite instant manifestation state or you're in a mundane space-time reality where you have to eat, you have to shit, you have to piss, all these things, and everybody has to do that. So people need clean drinking water. Like, if you knew everybody else was also you in another form, why wouldn't you want to take care of yourself as another? Why would you see that as a burden? Life gives, it doesn't take, right? And there's another part of one of these interviews where they make this point that there's like a consciousness, this evil consciousness, whatever you want to call it, that only knows how to take. That's the problem. But we can't go and blame this one evil being that just wants to be God. Oh, you're the bad one. You're the bad one. Because are we giving? Are we, even in our position as a slave, just not accepting slavery and then seeing how can we give to each other? Ignore this fucking idiot who thinks they're God. Fuck them. They'll benefit when we all do what's best. And us not accepting anything superior to us is actually helping that one being or many beings or whoever, because they're trapped also. Like, when you're God, that means you have to constantly micromanage all of reality to always sort out everything. And there is no real God, actually, superior being, that, because, I mean, for all the reasons he said, and it's just obvious that there isn't. So anybody who wants to try to be God is actually trapping themselves into actually an infinite form of slavery for themselves, because they have to constantly make sure nobody challenges them. You know, and you would have to believe you're the only one that exists. Because if others really actually exist and you're not actually God, so therefore actually others exist, and then you fuck with them, and they actually are in some way affecting reality as well, you're fucking with yourself at some point. It's a consequence you're going to experience. So whether you're in that position or you're just who you are equal to that person, in the sense that what you accept and allow ripples out as yourself, as reality, into yourself, and it comes back just like a wave rippling out, hitting the shore, bouncing back, interacting. Like, we are all of that. And I think that's the point that Buddha missed. You can't just delete yourself. It's not possible. You can't delete yourself. So you can't get out of it that easily. You just have to take responsibility here. Okay, let me see if there was another interview, and I pulled it up for a reason. Let me see. Do I have a timestamp on this? Let me see. What was the thing I wanted to show here? It was just an interesting point. Okay, let me start here. I think that's why I backed it up, because I want to get to this point about Kant, and he goes a little bit into the Descartes stuff, just like for a few minutes, because it was some of the stuff he was saying at the end of the last one that he gives more. This was the first interview, and then that one I played was like actually the second one he did with this guy. But in this one, he starts with a lot more context, so it's just a really cool point. I'm going to play it for a minute.
Reality and our limited frame of interpretation, right, based on human consciousness. The denial of our capacity to ultimately discern what's going on with this phenomenon can also be a way to defer responsibility for dealing with some very tangible things that are going on that are deeply disturbing and that have very serious sociological and political implications.
I couldn't agree more. I think some people who are so far off the deep end in the consciousness realm are there because it's unfalsifiable.
Yeah.
Because it's like impossible to study, because it really doesn't even touch our consensus reality. So you don't need to justify it. It turns into its own sort of cult. But you said something very interesting there. You said there's some deeply disturbing things going on in just the kind of more prosaic nuts and bolts, version of the UFO story. What do you mean by that?
Let me come to that in a moment.
Okay.
But before we, scare the bejesus out of the listeners right off the bat, let me give a little bit more historical context for what I was saying.
Yeah.
What just real quick, what they're referring to as the nuts and bolts was that idea of like this future version of humans who literally create physical UFOs to travel through space and time and so forth, versus another level of UFOs, which just means manifestations that you can't understand what they are. Is it an actual physical spacecraft or is it some ball of light thing? What the fuck is it? There's two levels of it is what he's saying. There's the nuts and bolts, which are physical craft piloted by somebody, and that's deeply disturbing because what the fuck are they doing? And then there's the other level of it as well. So I was just giving more context. We talked about this a little while ago, but I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yes.
So, without naming names, Kant has become, I think, very important to some people
He's referring to Immanuel Kant, the philosopher,
who have taken a very abstract approach to interpreting what's going on with the UAP phenomenon. And if you look at Immanuel Kant's own life, here's a guy, and by the way, I wrote about this in my first book, Prometheus and Atlas. There's a whole chapter where I discuss Descartes and Kant and basically the constitution of the world picture of the Age of Enlightenment, right? And the thing about Kant is that in his youth, he actually took the time and care to read the entirety of Emanuel Swedenborg's Arcana Coelestia, The Secrets of Heaven, which has all kinds of accounts of extraterrestrials living on various planets and different gradations of existence, right, and planes of being and so on and so forth. And there's also, more significantly, a ton about psi abilities in that book, about clairvoyance and telekinesis and so on and so forth. Well, Kant reads all of this, and then he writes the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals in a way that develops an abstraction based on Swedenborg. He's using Swedenborg, but then he's warping the metaphysical structure of Swedenborg's work in order to construct an unknowable reality beyond the veil of appearances that's conditioned by the limits of our own consciousness.
It's so crazy. Like if you've ever studied philosophy, that is the mainstream understanding. It's like Kant was like, well, how can we actually know if the content of our perceptions is actually a real thing? All we can know essentially is our perceptual experience. And how do we know if what we're perceiving actually is a thing out there or not? And so we can't know. We literally can't know if there is or what it is. It might be something totally not what we think we're perceiving. It's just ultimately unknowable, right? So then you're taking all of the hidden parts of reality, the occluded, occult parts of reality, whatever that is, but I would say it's this sort of base level of reality where you have possibilities, like you could form things into, and you're not accessing that part. You're accessing through your senses just things as they've already been formed as, but not the level at which you could reform things or you could actually create. You're now creating like at a second order, not at the original level, but at the second level of the created things, the forms that are things in, you're now just manipulating those forms instead of the base layer where they're forming from in the first place. And he's like, well, that part's unknowable. Can't know about that part. We can't possibly know it. So we're just stuck in this perceptual world. Which if you go and you study the destiny perspective of Jesus, and Jesus explaining that I meaning Jesus, not me, but I'm speaking as first person Jesus. Jesus says, like, I was trying to explain to people that you're stuck in all these pictures, which you could say that's the same thing as your perceptions of things, but you're actually God. And 5 minutes ago, you were up in heaven getting ready to come down into this body, and now you just think this is who you are, this life that you're in. You literally just incarnated here as a baby and forgot who the fuck you actually are. And when you die, you're going to find out, but you're going to be trapped in a cycle of reincarnation that you can't get out of because it's managed. When you get out of your body, you go through a process that's managed so that you go right back into one, depending on how much trust can be placed into you to manage the system. And if you're not at a high level of trust within the system, you won't be placed at a high level. You place at a shitty level, basically, right? So not that Jesus necessarily understood all of that, but he could see that, hey, you guys, like, you're not who you think you are. You're lost in these pictures, which is like your perceptions. Like you're looking at things and thinking this is the way things really are when actually you're at effect. You're not realizing you actually are at cause, but you don't realize it. And you think you're only at cause over the effects. So it's like you've reversed it. And we killed him for that, just because he wanted to tell us the truth. Okay.
And if you read his earliest writings, which he suppressed in his own lifetime, Kant admits that the reason that he did this is that the stuff in Swedenborg is so disturbing that it would destabilize society, including on a political level. So what Kant wants to do is create this metaphysical model that allows him to define what he calls a kingdom of ends, where each human being is an end in himself, a moral agent equal to every other person. And then based on this, he can frame this categorical imperative that you should never use any other person as a means, and every person should be treated as an end in himself, right?
Even though the structure of the society he was living in certainly treats certain classes of human beings as means and not ends in themselves. So it's ironic, right?
It's like the Archimedean point of his whole moral system. Well, he does this by misappropriating and distorting Swedenborg and covering over both the psychic and telekinetic accounts in Swedenborg's writings and also the accounts of, various forms of extraterrestrial intelligence. And I see the same move being made today in certain sectors of the UAP conversation.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, that's a great book, Prometheus and Atlas. Everybody should buy it. It's this sort of sweeping philosophical treatise where you go through the advent of empiricism and reason and, the Enlightenment and figures like Kant and Descartes. And in Kant's case, I think you also say that, like, the occult, the reason to keep the occult or sort of separate somehow or off limits is because it would involve a storming of heaven or something. And did he have a political motive in doing this? Because with Descartes, I think you say that he was a Jesuit spy. And maybe
Descartes was literally a Jesuit spy. In other words, Descartes was in the employ of people who were holier than the Pope. That phrase, holier than the Pope? These were agents of the Vatican that were acting against the sort of like...
It's funny, I just realized, like, the Pope isn't the head of the church. And that should have been obvious, but Catholics believe the Pope is the head of the church, but he's like the president. He doesn't make the fucking decisions. He's an actor. He's just an actor playing that role. He's not the guy running the show.
Status quo modus operandi of the Catholic Church in France. They were like more zealous than the Pope, and they were Jesuits. And they had sent René Descartes to infiltrate the Rosicrucian order and to develop a false scientific paradigm that would reduce everything in the physical world to basically mechanical causality, which then has the effect of relegating everything that can't be encompassed within a mechanistic grid and framework of interpretation into the realm of the spiritual, which is in the domain of the Catholic Church, right? So then the Church gets to continue to have a monopoly on discourse about anything spiritual, and the common citizen is presented with a scientific paradigm that's soul-crushingly nihilistic.
So interesting, this idea that if we understood what was really going on in the reality we can't see, they were afraid we would storm heaven. That's what Swedenborg, or that's what Kant was saying about Swedenborg's material. If people really understood. It's really interesting.
So that he will then remain within the arms of the church.
And you think that was Descartes' mission?
Absolutely.
To do that?
Yeah, he was a hired Jesuit agent. I mean, the guy was literally a stormtrooper who functioned as a military intelligence attaché to Catholic armies that were going through Protestant villages and burning them to the ground and, basically engaging in a inquisitory religious war against the Protestants of France. And this is the guy who we trace our modern scientific paradigm to. Now, Kant wasn't, a paid agent of anybody as far as I can tell. But he definitely had political motivations, right? And the thing is, Kant's political motivations are not something, antiquarian and, only relevant to his own epoch. We still face the same concerns that he did as a serious thinker grappling with evidence for the paranormal. So, for example, as I point out very early on, and, I've come back to this over and over again in the 14 books that I've written, but it's right there in Prometheus and Atlas from the beginning. If you consider what it would mean for telepathy, clairvoyance, telekinesis, or what we call psychokinesis these days, to achieve mainstream scientific recognition, and for large numbers of people to then adopt training protocols for these latent human abilities, right? The way that we have now a lot of the remote viewers offering remote viewing training. Imagine what kinds of social challenges that faces us with, right? I mean, if people become adept telepaths or adept clairvoyants, there's no such thing as privacy left. There's no physical privacy left. Anyone can see you doing whatever you're doing inside the privacy of your own home. Anyone can even step into your mind, like the remote viewers, for example, who were tasked to psychically spy on Saddam Hussein during the first Gulf War, Lynn Buchanan and others. They actually went into Saddam's mind to the extent that, for example, they would get ill when he was ill and so on and so forth. And
Yes.
So this is like a horrendous violation of personal privacy. And then when you go to psychokinesis, it's even worse, right? So there's this.
So I think that he has a valid point that this is why these things have been suppressed, but I don't think it's relevant now. If you take my thought experiment seriously that there's no God in heaven anymore, that the bureaucracy, the hierarchy is all irrelevant, dismantled, non-existent anymore, that literally you die, you review your life, and you come back to Earth possibly randomly into a random body. Like, in other words, there's no one protecting the hierarchy anymore. And if you also assume that because of the increasing density of reality with information density, with physical density, which I know that sounds very abstract, so I'll just leave that at that. If you make an assumption for a moment that that there's actually no real danger of anyone developing psychic abilities at the level he's talking about, I don't think that is a real possibility or a danger. I think that it's a little bit of a fantasy. That doesn't mean I don't think that psychic abilities ever have existed or that maybe some people can access them. I don't think the average person will anytime soon be able to actually access them or train them. I think it's very unlikely. I don't see that as a problem. It's irrelevant because even if ever like, but I do understand his point. Like, yes, if everybody had these psychic abilities, there wouldn't be any privacy, and that would be a reason why the elite wouldn't want everybody to know that. But I don't think that's the real motivation behind why separating our access to be able to see beyond the veil. I don't think that's the real reason. I think the real reason is so we don't see that there was a fucking actual control system in place. So I don't think it's just really the point that he's saying here, although, take it or leave it if you want. But and I'm also saying that because I don't think there's any value in saying, oh yeah, if we all need to develop psychic abilities, and then it's like, it's not a solution. Is that going to feed everybody? Like, is everybody going to have the time to do that? People can barely survive right now. They can barely pay their fucking bills. That's not... Unfortunately, the answer to the problems in this world is much more mundane than some cool experience of developing psychic abilities and psychokinetic and astral travel shit. It's called, we need to go into politics and change the laws so that people are not legally able to be abused through anyone using money in a way that they receive when others lose. Basic shit. Okay, so I just wanted to ground this a little bit because I understand his fascination with it. He doesn't understand, obviously, the points that I'm bringing up here, so I'm not faulting him because he just doesn't know. But it's definitely not an actual point that I think really is relevant here. Let me see if there's anything else in here. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about UFOs and stuff, which is all very interesting, but I don't really care that much about it. What time is it? Okay. I think what I'll do is I'll leave it at that for tonight because there's a lot more stuff I want to go into. This point here about physics as code, root access intrusions, Landauer. Oh, can you see what I'm looking at? No. I'm just looking at the timestamps. I don't really want to go into all this UFO shit. Actually, this one's pretty interesting. The moon. Maybe we'll do that tonight, and I'll just play this a little bit because it's really interesting. But I'm going to leave for tomorrow probably this stuff about physics, Landauer, massive global data, and future catastrophe, information catastrophe. Really interesting stuff, but I'm a little skeptical of it. But it is still very fascinating. I was reading some scientific papers that are pushing back on some of these ideas, but I haven't really made up my own mind about it. So maybe we'll do that together tomorrow. Let me just play this moon stuff because it's so... It's more relevant to what we're talking about now. It won't be so relevant to the information stuff. I think tomorrow I'll go into the information stuff. So let me just skip to this part about the moon because I think it's really fascinating. Let's see.
Like it was like kind of late 60s, early 70s. Yep. It's kind of this interesting kind of, thing.
And he was the right age by that point to be recruited into such an organization, In any case, Brandenburg came to the conclusion that something like an Empire State building's worth of nuclear weapons had been detonated to produce that kind of a deviation.
On Mars, by the way.
Of xenon-129 isotope at Cydonia. But so Swan saw evidence of this on the ground.
Swan, he's referring to as a remote viewer.
Okay, like a devastated civilization. And he said it was the same people who he saw on the moon as basically slave drivers. Now, unbeknownst to Swan, and by the way, when Swan remote viewed Mars, he worked with a team of, I believe, 5 other remote.
So just to recap what he was talking about, because you don't have the context, these remote viewers saw evidence on Mars that there was like basically some kind of like nuclear catastrophe, which sounds wild, but when obviously it sounds wild, but the reasoning behind it is actually pretty interesting. But they were also remote viewing the moon, and what he was alluding to is that the remote viewers could tell that the people that were having this catastrophe on Mars, because they went back in time before the catastrophe and so forth, they also saw these same people, who I'm assuming he's referring to as the Nordics or whoever, were also on the moon, basically like enslaving people or something. So I'm going to pick it up from there.
Viewers, and they were all, they did it independently, right? And they're all blind to the target. But unbeknownst to that whole team led by Ingo Swann, in 1984, I think it was the same year, in 1984, Joe McMoneagle at the Monroe Institute did a remote viewing of Mars for the CIA. And
Really? I thought it was in the 90s.
No,
Really?
1984.
1984.
Yeah, go look it up. The paper's available now. It's been declassified. Wow. You can read the whole report.
Yeah.
It's been declassified by the CIA.
Yeah.
And it's 1984. I believe the title is Mars 1 million BC.
Yeah.
And because initially they say to him, go to...
So the CIA had remote viewers, remote viewing Mars in 1 million BC, like the time frame. They had them go look at Mars and, remote view, however they do that, like we talked about, Mars in 1 million BC, and report what they were seeing, which is like wild, right? Like, hey, you could say, oh, this is all bullshit. You don't believe it, that they really were able to do it or see anything real. You could be skeptical, but the CIA actually had them do this. Like, why would the CIA be like doing it and knowing that it's all just a bunch of bullshit? Like, that doesn't prove that what they saw was real, but I'm saying, like, the CIA was literally having people remote view Mars in 1 million BC. That's fucking weird, right? Like, just in itself is fucking weird, okay? These are things that I was, aware of in bits and pieces. So I'm not like, oh my God, I never heard of this. But I also know a lot of people have no clue. They have no clue. Because, some of the things I've studied, you talk to somebody who hasn't seen these kind of things and they're like, man, what you're talking about is kind of out there. And I'm like, that's because you're not paying attention. Like, the CIA doesn't think it's weird. Like, so... in your little normie life of just like going to work as a slave and never looking outside the fucking plantation, like, yeah, it's weird. But what are the slave masters doing out there? They're fucking remote viewing Mars.
Mars, like 1 million BC. That's what's in the envelope, right? But what he said to them was, when McMoneagle wound up there, he said, oh, it's all in ruins. It's there were people once here. I see like ghosts of people who once were, but they're not here anymore.
I saw people who were 12 to 14 feet tall.
So then
pyramids.
Yes. So they said to him, okay, well, if it's devastated and the people aren't around anymore, go back to when they were around. Mm-hmm. Now, he never reports on how far back that was. He just goes mentally to when they still had a civilization.
So they go back to 1 million and there's some recent ruins, and then he goes back further.
Exactly.
And he sees the people.
Exactly.
Now,
these people are the same again as Swann saw. Very tall, sort of Nordic people, very broad-shouldered people, not an ounce of body fat. They're wearing these skin-tight clothes, that reveal every contour of every muscle. And he says some very interesting things about their worldview, their outlook, and their dying civilization. But what's most interesting is this. He says that a group of them were sent out in a craft to go scout out a new world that they could possibly develop as a habitation for themselves, because Mars was no longer a planet on which they could survive, right?
That's weird.
And this scout ship runs into a planet where there are constant electrical storms. There's a tremendous amount of volcanic activity. It's the opposite of Mars, but in a way that's also difficult to support human life. In other words, it's overgrown with vegetation, right? It's an incredibly volatile but living planet. And they're like, we can't live in this planet under these conditions. We would have to modify this planet to live there. And so I suspect that what's going on there is the scouting out of a primordial Earth by people from Mars. Which then brings us to the question of the moon, and what the moon is, right? I mean, so we've got Carl Wolf telling us there's a city on the dark side of the moon. We've got Ingo Swann having done remote viewing that confirms that. But I think that the situation with the moon is actually a lot more disturbing than there simply being, a city-sized alien base on the backside of the base on the backside of the moon. You look at the geometry and the mathematics of the moon in relation to the Earth and the sun. It makes no sense. The moon is 1/400th the
I just want to add this point real quick. Like, this conversation was September 27th, right? In my opinion, I don't think it's a coincidence that they did this moon mission. Like, hey, we flew around the back of the moon. Look, there ain't nothing there. Kind of weird, right? Like, also, like, because I'm always on X, like, they're constantly pushing this narrative of, like, the astronauts, you know, they saw, like, oh, dude, I saw this one tweet. I didn't get the link, but there's one of the astronauts, it's the black guy, right? And he's like, they show him he's a family man, he's so accomplished and everything, and he's like super smart and PhD and all this. And I think he was maybe the pilot. No, I don't know if he's the pilot. He's like one of the guys. There's like only 4 people on this mission. They're really hyping him up, and he's a Christian, right? And he's given speeches, you know, to the people where he's from, you know, after he lands and everything. And he's like, you know, God says for us to love each other and all. It's like hyping up this whole thing about God and Jesus. And then I saw a clip where the other astronaut was like, I don't believe in God. I'm not a Christian. But when we got back to Earth and I saw the cross, it just moved me emotionally. And I'm like, why the fuck would he say that? Like, what? The cross? Like, it's just this weird, I can't put my finger on it, but it's like a weird psyop they're doing right now to impulse God and religion and Christianity, and at the same time convince everybody there's nothing to see on the moon. See, we went and checked on it. See, nothing to see there. And I think it's odd because these kind of conversations are suddenly, look, this video has 760,000 views, right? And there's this guy's been going on a lot of podcasts. And like, I just think it's weird that now suddenly we're going back to the moon after all these years just to fly around it for some reason. And, oh, look, we're going to check the back of it. See, look, there's a picture of it. Nothing there. It's really cool looking. All right, next. Like, it's very weird.
Distance between the Earth and the Sun, and it's 1/400th the size of the Sun. And so that creates sense. Geometry and the mathematics of the moon in relation to the Earth and the Sun, it makes no sense. The moon is 1/400th the distance between the Earth and the Sun, and it's 1/400th the size of the Sun. And so that creates these perfect eclipses that we see, right? That by itself is very odd. And then you look at the fact that the craters on the moon are all only a few miles deep. You never find a crater on the moon that's more than 5 or 6 miles deep. But some of these craters are like 186 miles wide, right? So, and at the, you know, the base of the largest craters, you see a convex surface. In other words, it looks nothing like the Grand Canyon or the Valles Marineris on Mars, where, like, you know, an asteroid would hit it and you'd see a deep gouge that should be proportionally as deep as it is wide. No. What you're seeing, apparently, is a hard shell that's being revealed through the impact against the regolith by whatever object. The ejecta is going 186 miles out in every direction, but there's never a crater deeper than a few miles, and what's being revealed there at the crater base is a hard, convex surface.
Weird.
Then there's the impact. Well, one of them was a test, one of them was accidental. The first one, I think part of an Apollo lander hit the moon, and there was a seismograph that had already been positioned there, and it registered basically the seismic signature that you would face if you were measuring a hollow object. That basically the reverberations went down for about 20 miles, and then they stop. And the way that the reverberation was distributed throughout the moon suggested that, as the observers, you know, put it, it rang like a bell. And so then they repeated this test deliberately a second time. I think it was on Apollo 13. And this time they hit it with a more significant impact, and this kind of seismic signature was observed for 3 hours, the moon basically ringing like a hollow object for 3 hours. So there's all this evidence that the moon is an artificial satellite. And setting this in the context of Joe McMonagle's remote viewing of Mars, what I argue in Closer Encounters is that the people on Mars probably constructed the moon for two purposes. One, as a very large-scale transport of a significant population from Mars to the orbit of the Earth, and two, as a terraforming device to radically alter the ecological situation of the planet so as to make it habitable for humans, right? They said they were...
I'm looking at this article, they're like, no, it rings because it's so solid. It's so solid that nothing deadens the vibrations. Right. Okay. That seems reasonable.
Is horrendous. To radically alter the ecological situation of the planet so as to make it habitable for humans, right? They said there were these horrendous constant electrical storms and volcanic eruptions and so on and so forth. Well, the Earth spun a lot faster before if the moon had not been in orbit at some point, we would have been dealing with a planet that was a lot more unstable, spinning much faster, prone to toppling over. The moon acts as a tremendous stabilizer for the Earth. By the way, that's another thing about the moon, is that it has a unusually stable orbit as compared to the moons around other planets, as if there's a stabilizer inside of it. So I think it was created to transport a large population, and it was used as a terraforming device. Now, to answer your deeper question, what does that say about who these people are, right? Number one, it says that they're people. So NHI is not an appropriate appellation for these
NHI meaning non-human intelligence.
Individuals, right? They look like us, particularly they look Nordic, and they appear to have been the progenitors of the human race. Not only that, they appear to have terraformed the Earth to make it habitable for humanoids. But I have one huge problem with all of that. The time scales. It makes no sense whatsoever to me that you would have people who look like us.
Okay, so he's going to get into his theory that these guys were time traveling or something to that effect. But hold on, let me check something real quick, because there was another point he made that maybe it was in a different maybe it was in a different, what the hell? Give me 1 second, guys.
Plague promulgators are representing the same faction that was lording over humanity in the Sumerian epoch through, the name of Enki or whatever, the Anunnakis aligned with Enki, or the Elohim in the, Old Testament, or the Devas, to put it in Hindu terms. Richard Thompson...
It's not the one I was looking for. Damn, where is that one? I thought it was...
plague promulgators are representing the same faction that was lording over humanity in the Sumerian epoch through, the name of Enki or whatever, the Anunnakis aligned with Enki, or the Elohim in the, Old Testament, or the Devas, to put it in Hindu terms. Richard Thompson, he's the guy who co-authored Forbidden Archaeology with Michael Cremo. Richard Thompson has written a great UFO book, like looking very carefully at Hindu scriptures such as the Ramayana and Mahabharata. I think it's called Alien Identities. Now, granted, he's coming from out of a Hare Krishna tradition, and so he has his own religious commitments and so forth, but you can filter that out and just look at the empirical analysis. And it's very clear from Thompson's analysis in that book that the devas.
Yeah, it's in a different one. It's not in this one, but I'll just tell you, and then we'll leave it at that. I wish I could find it, but it just took me a while to look for it. But there's another interview where he talks about the moon, and it was through some remote viewing process or something, and he was saying that the moon, I'm trying to remember what it was specifically he said. Basically, it was the point that the moon was not just a transport for these aliens or whatever, but that it was set up as some kind of, it's a part of the reincarnation control system. Okay, which was, I'm just trying to remember where I actually found that. Was it in this one maybe? Let me see if it's in here. I don't think so.
If you have faster than light travel.
Yeah, he's basically saying it's either angels or
Angels,
demons.
and that's the language he used, which I take exception to that, angels or demons, because I think maybe in a Nietzschean fashion, the moral evaluation there needs to be flipped. That the angels are the ones controlling the totalitarian, hierarchical, mind-melded, hive-minded system. By the way, and I used to teach comparative religion. In all the Abrahamic religions, one thing that they consistently say about the angels is that they have no will of their own. The angels have no real individuality. They have no real will of their own. They do the will of God, which binds them together with a single purpose. That's like a totalitarian society controlled by an AI. Okay? Now I'm going to go somewhere really disturbing with this, but it's
an angel just means messenger generically, so it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Evangelos.
Okay. I found it. Let me just jump here just to get this point across. I just thought it was so interesting.
A lot of experiencers, abductees, who reported the same kinds of things as Robert Monroe did in Four Journeys, where they said that we are in a control system that's being managed from out of a metallic sphere just beyond the Earth, and they describe the inside of this thing.
What?
I think, going back to our first conversation, what they're describing is the inside of the moon. That there is what we might call, using the Soviet language, a psychotronic control system, a kind of spectral technology inside of the moon, which is impinging on and manipulating humans in the afterlife state.
What?
And it's not omnipotent.
Yeah.
It's not a flawless system. So it's possible to assert your free will and self-determination in the face of this system, but it's very difficult. So a lot of people have had near-death experiences, for example. They describe being pulled toward this light. It's like they couldn't resist going into the light.
Yeah.
They tried in some cases, but it was almost as if it was an electromagnet, pulling them into it.
Sure.
And then when they go into the light, one of the most common things that's described is that people are shown their dead relatives and religious authority figures, like Jesus. And, or like if you're a Hindu, you see Hindu gods, interestingly. I'll give you a terrifying case from a Hindu in a minute. So you're pulled into this light, and then they show you your dead relatives, and they show you Jesus and whatever. Well, here's a problem, Jesse, is that if you look at Dr. Ian Stevenson's extremely rigorous research on reincarnation that he did at the University of Virginia for decades on children's spontaneous memories of past lives, all the cases show that the average interval between death and reincarnation is something like, it could be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years maximum. It's usually not more than several years. So when you are having a near-death experience and your grandmother, and let's say you're in your 60s and you see your grandmother who died when you were in your 20s, that's bullshit. You are being shown an artificially generated simulacrum of your dead relatives to manipulate you by a psychotronic technology.
This is getting
By a
into...
psychotronic technology.
You really think that?
Yes, I do.
Really?
And I say that as someone who
It's like, that sounds wild, guys. Come on. Like, oh, but Jesus dying for your sins and his blood saving you and all this and the angels and the fallen Satan and the demons and all that. That's totally normal stuff. But this sounds crazy. I'm like, he's just describing a technology that kind of actually makes sense. Like, it's not that you have to believe it, but there's a technology so that when you die, you get pulled back in so that they can kind of control you and make sure you go back and you don't challenge anything. Is that really that crazy compared to any other shit that's in the Bible or anywhere else? I was going to show you one more funny thing and then we'll leave it there. Oh man, let me show Parasite. This is so funny. This is one of my favorite comedians. His name's Lemmy. He's like this Scottish guy, but he does like a sketch comedy show, and so this is one of his characters, and it's a show called Parasite. Like, you know, it's like a paranormal guy who can like talk to your dead relatives and like talk to the other side and stuff. But they just holy shit, man. She's like she's downstairs. She's covered in daddy long legs. I just think it's so funny because like the expectation is you're gonna say all this positive shit, and he's like, nah, she's in hell covered in spiders and they're biting her forever and they're making her go outside even though she hates it. It's funny, man. That guy's really funny. All right, I'll leave it at that for tonight, guys, and yeah, we'll see what we're gonna do tomorrow, but I do have some cool things to share tomorrow as well, kind of in a totally different angle. But man, I really wanted to get to this article. I'm not going to do it right now, but just as a little preview, or maybe you guys can go look at this on your own. Where did it go? Remember he was talking about Buddha and reincarnation and all that? You should check out this article on the Destiny website. Buddha, the End of the Soul and Reincarnation. From May 2007. It's really good. Maybe we'll look at that tomorrow. And then I got some other cool things to show you tomorrow night. Another existential threat to reality that has to do with data centers. And it's probably not what you're thinking, not what you're expecting. So we'll go into that a little bit tomorrow. Otherwise, appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for the feedback in the chat. And we'll see y'all tomorrow night, same time, 8:30 p.m. right here. All right, everybody. Have a good night. See y'all tomorrow.